Chapter 424. In the holy capital, the white-haired old man was thinking about the general trend of the times. Thousands of miles away in the Tucker Plains, the black-haired young man was also thinking about everything under the afterglow of the setting sun. It could be seen that the girl had put in a lot of effort for this, and the black-haired young man who proposed this matter naturally did not want to be outdone. He wanted to do something himself, but he did not expect to be flatly rejected by Miss Angel on the grounds that she was injured. In desperation, the restless black-haired young man could only divert his attention, and the matter of Mother Goddess was almost naturally recalled by him. The black-haired young man could basically guarantee that in the current Shia, if he said that he was the second most watched by Mother Goddess, no one would dare to say that they were the first. He even had the confidence to wrestle with the Archbishop of the Saint Heroes Society. After all, Luoya was also an old friend of his. The young man who was a guest star of the Saint Heroes Society thought so and shook his head, finding joy in his own luck. This time in Banktown, although Luoya seemed to have seen Mother Goddess, there was basically no reaction of being watched. For this, the young man carefully analyzed this point and thought that it should be an illusion brought by the appearance of the fog of concealment, and it should not be the real Mother Goddess. After all, if it was just an underdeveloped 6 disasters, the awakened of Akkad could still think of something. For example, in the past, Luoya's ancestor, Vincent, seemed to have chased after Mr. Darkness, but if it was Mother Goddess, at least for now, the young man had no power to fight back. Previously, Hanks once said that many people found the core of their beliefs through the experience of life and death, and thus promoted to Source Level 3. After Luoya was seriously injured this time, he vaguely had some feelings in his heart, but he was afraid that it would take some time to summarize them. Luoya? Really, what are you thinking about? You didn't respond when I called you, I thought you. Sorry, I was a little sleepy just now, so I didn't hear you. Looking at the young man with an apologetic face, Nu'ayr was silent for a moment. After her rapid breathing calmed down a little, the young girl bent down and couldn't help but confirm again. Of course. You've already healed the wound on my chest, and I've already removed my internal organs. What else can happen? After hearing Luoya's words, the Nu'ayr, who had personally treated her and even confirmed her wounds several times, could only nod hesitantly. However, looking at the smiling young man, Nu'ayr subconsciously felt that something was wrong. I'm fine. I was just thinking about something related to the Mother Goddess and got a little lost in thought. After hearing Luoya's honest confession, the blonde girl heaved a sigh of relief. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around the young man's neck. Leaning her head on his shoulder, she whispered softly, "Is this an order? Then I will obey, Your Highness. It's still a little cold in the Tucker Plains at night. You're weak, so you need to be careful." After the sun went down, Luoya, who felt a little cold, covered himself with a blanket. Just as he was about to instruct Nu'ayr to wear more clothes, he suddenly frowned because he smelled something. The young man's expression changed. Seeing Luoya like this, the blonde girl blinked her eyes and panicked. She couldn't help but think of the bloody smell after her massacre. What's wrong? Is there a bloody smell? It's probably from handling food. Wait, food? It seems that Nu'ayr's first time won't be too smooth. Half an hour later, Luoya and the blonde girl sat opposite each other. On the table in front of them, a roasted chicken was lying on the plate, accompanied by some roasted vegetables. For a long time, Nu'ayr, as the princess, whether it was maintaining the relationship with the nobles or personal reputation, her performance could be described as perfect. She also excelled in art, music, and other aspects. Even in St. Freya Academy, where geniuses gathered, she was still the top student among the top students. The black-haired young man observed Nu'ayr with some curiosity in his golden eyes. In fact, this was the first time he saw his princess fail in something. But Luoya wasn't surprised. After all, the princess cooking was already very ridiculous in Shia. Not to mention an old country like the Austin Empire, even in a highly developed and open area like Rose, noble women didn't know how to cook. The only exception was probably the country of scholars, Bulonia, where many noble women were interested in cooking desserts. But the country of scholars was in fact a country founded by a group of civilian scholars, so it was fundamentally different from others. Observing the roasted chicken that was a little black, but other than the heat, there was no problem. Luo Ye thought for a moment, then directly cut a piece and put it into his mouth, making the blonde girl opposite him stunned. Is that so? I think the taste is not bad. Besides, this is your first time cooking, I don't want to miss it. As a young master born in a marquis family, Luo Ye grew up in luxury. Nua Iyer naturally didn't believe the young man's words, but seeing Luo Ye not being picky about the food she made, the girl couldn't help but feel happy. Every morning, they would wake up together, have breakfast together, and go to work separately. At night, they would gather together to eat and share the day's experience, then snuggle up to each other and fall asleep again. Thinking of this, the girl was in a daze. After a long time, she suddenly said, Luo Ye, what do you think of the Wei Dulia ancestors' choice? Chapter 425. At the dining table, the black-haired young man was stuffing food into his mouth as he thought about how the princess learned this skill. However, after a long silence, Nua Iyer's sudden question caught him off guard. Nua Iyer's ancestor, Wei Dulia, and Luo Ye's ancestor, Ponte, were once teacher and student. After going through a series of hardships together, they finally fell in love with each other. However, due to their identities and many ethical issues, they couldn't become husband and wife in the end. After comparing the records of both sides, Luo Ye could basically confirm that these two ancestors couldn't bear it anymore and faked their deaths to escape after the theocracy entered a period of peace. However, Nua Iyer's question made him somewhat unsure of how to answer. Looking at the confused young man, the golden-haired girl pondered for a moment and couldn't help but look forward to it. Indeed, for them, that's probably the best ending. That kind of life. Do you like it? Facing Nua Iyer's expectant gaze, Luo Ye couldn't help but stare blankly at everything in front of him in silence. For ordinary people, it was a daily life, but for the girls, it was a dream. In fact, even during the holidays, Miss Angel had a lot of things to do. Being friendly with the nobles in the palace, being roped in by the local nobles, and many other matters in the Vatican consumed a lot of Nua Iyer's energy. As for the future, the prophecy of destruction, if it was only a fantasy that existed in Wilhelmina's words before, then now, everything was slowly becoming a reality. For the girls, the personal line crisis in Eye of the Recorder was like a shadow that followed them closely. Nua Iyer's experience this time was a warning. If you want to say that I like it, then I definitely like it. However, Wei Dulia's ancestor did that on the premise that the country was stable and the tide of the era was peaceful. I'm afraid this is already very difficult for us now. It's okay to experience it, but let's forget about faking our deaths. Otherwise, the theocracy will be in chaos. As a subject, what I should do now is to advise my lord. I don't want to be known as a traitor. But, if that day really comes, I want to be with you. Miss Angel couldn't help but widen her eyes at the unexpected attack. She didn't know how to respond to the blunt words. Her lips trembled, and her cheeks began to blush. After a moment of silence, she couldn't help but ask. I don't agree, but that's from the standpoint of the government. In the end, the sudden disappearance of the emperor is a fatuous ruler. However, a self-indulgent ruler is actually nothing. Like I said, it was the government's position before, not my own. It doesn't matter if you're a muddle-headed and tyrannical ruler, a tyrannical tyrant, or a mediocre ruler. I don't care. What I need to do is to stay by your side just like right now. Looking into the young man's golden eyes, the golden-haired angel was stunned for a moment. Suddenly, she felt her eyes heating up. She could only turn her head to the side to hide it. In this world, there are people who judge things as they are, and there are people who entrust their trust to others. Neither is right or wrong. I just chose the latter because I believe in Nua Iyer Heathcliff. You speak as if you're a puppy following behind its owner. Can I put the chains on you? Tisk, how stubborn. Speaking of which, it's almost time. Is it just the two of us? The black-haired young man who was thinking about the date narrowed his eyes and looked at the girl opposite him with a warm smile. Chapter 426. Under the curtain of the night, the black-haired young man stood calmly in front of the huge palace complex. He silently scanned his surroundings as the bell rang in the distance. Looking at the magnificent and familiar buildings that he had visited several times, Luo Ye walked forward. He walked through the wide and majestic city gate, walked through the empty square, walked through the long corridor hung with exquisite ornaments, and finally arrived in front of the familiar door. Along with the sound of the door opening and closing, light shone through the gap in the door and gradually spread to both sides of the black-haired young man. Everything in the room once again appeared in the young man's eyes. Not long ago, this was the place where the black-haired young man and the white-haired witch met for the first time. In this dark place where flowers bloomed, the two of them fought with their wits as their weapons. They both won and lost, joined hands once again and used this as an opportunity to sign a contract. At this moment, the golden color had already spread between the throne and gradually extended from the corner of the wall. In fact, during the process of entering here, Luo Ye had already seen this familiar radiance. When this land was completely dominated by the golden color, the witch would lose control of this place and her connection with the black-haired young man would be severed. The result was obvious. Luo Ye had already predicted this result, but even so, looking at the witch on the throne, the young man was filled with guilt. On the high platform, the white-haired witch gently stood up. Her scarlet eyes flickered and her face showed some displeasure, just like a young girl quarreling with her lover. "No, I just feel that I have wronged you." Hearing the black-haired young man's words, Altacia fell into silence while Luo Ye revealed an apologetic expression. In ancient times, the witch race had an extremely special status and authority compared to other races. It was a race that all living beings feared. Even the angels who considered themselves as messengers of God didn't dare to easily offend them. As the queen of the witch race, Altacia had an extremely high self-esteem. On the throne, hearing Luo Ye's words, the white-haired witch's expression calmed down a little. She looked at the young man and the anger in her heart gradually extinguished. After a long time, she looked to the side and said, "What are you referring to?" On the throne, a rare smile appeared on Altacia's face. She raised a finger and said with bright eyes, "I see. Should I say that you haven't forgotten your original intentions? The angelic corruption won't stop here. It will continue to worsen after I die. When you encounter your enemy, the corruption should have reached its final stage. By then, I'm afraid that only the Gulandair, whose attributes conflict with the angels the most, will be able to move. I'm afraid your enemy isn't as simple as you think. I can sense a chaotic aura that is full of inauspiciousness. Based on the results of the divination, it is not optimistic either." As the queen of witches, who was synonymous with calamity in the ancient times, anything that could make Altacia feel ominous would definitely be extraordinary. Witches' divination abilities were second only to the goddess of fates. Indeed. Looking at the calm and slightly helpless young man below, Altacia's face showed a pleasant smile. She narrowed her eyes slightly, and her eyes were full of expectations. The small and flexible tongue licked her lips gently. The white-haired witch stroked her cheek with her hand and said with narrowed eyes, revealing an inexplicable desire. Luo Ye was unmoved by this, but he was grateful to the witch's support from the bottom of his heart. If you want to get something, you have to pay something. For Transcended, it is the same whether it is ancient times or now. Depression and joy are also contradictory. I always face this situation. Sir Hero is really evil. The black-haired young man raised the corner of his mouth and shook his head. He then looked at the witch above and asked seriously with a teasing smile, "Oh, do you have anything you want?" The smiling Luo Ye whispered the curse vessel he wanted. The white-haired witch blinked and slowly raised the corner of her mouth. Altacia, who heard Luo Ye's request, smiled happily. After a long time, the queen of witches, who completed the commission, looked at the young man and said goodbye with a smile. "Yes, in order to save the princess, I can only say goodbye temporarily, Your Majesty." The white-haired witch smiled happily, bowed her head slightly and lifted her skirt. At the same time, everything around the young man began to blur and distort. In the witch's heartfelt wish, the young man smiled and nodded. The next moment, Luo Ya's consciousness fell into darkness and returned to the real world. Before dawn, beside the sleeping black-haired young man, Heathcliff was experiencing unprecedented torture and contradiction. Glancing at Luo Ya, who trusted him completely and slept with his back to the girl, Nuayer's eyes flashed with a painful look. His hand holding the blanket tightened, and he began to hesitate about the decision he made before. Making such a decision was naturally inconsistent with the feelings and wishes in the girl's heart, but for Nuayer, this was the result of no choice, and the opportunity was the moment when the girl lost control in the evening. Nuayer couldn't remember the location of the base. Obviously, as a transcended whose bodily functions and thinking speed were far superior to ordinary people, and as a person who received military training from a young age, Nuayer shouldn't and couldn't forget her starting point. More importantly, there was a person in the base. Just like how people might forget the shop they used to frequent, no one would forget their home. Nuayer couldn't forget the location of the person close to her. In fact, she really did forget, so there was only one possibility. At that time, the girl understood that the erosion of angelification had probably reached the third stage, which had never been recorded in Heathcliff's records for thousands of years. It was no longer a complete replacement, but a partial contest of consciousness. From the third stage onwards, the deterioration of the girl's condition became much more concealed. She might be herself one moment, but in the next moment, she might have lost something important, and the consequences would also affect the people around her. After the bloody battle with the Angel King, Luo Ya's combat skills, which were her companions, had been limited by the unique erosion power of angels. The young man had also been seriously injured once, and his condition was unprecedentedly bad. Vaguely, Nuayer felt that the young man was hiding something. The plains at night were cold and dark, and the whistling of the night wind continued. The girl knew that after crossing the gate, she would once again face everything alone, and she might never be able to return. But when she thought that this was the only way to protect the person she loved to the greatest extent, Nuayer's heart became strong. Going out at night? I think it's better to tell me. In the room, Luo Ya's calm voice sounded, and the Nuayer in front of the door widened her eyes and froze. After a slight panic, the blonde girl hurriedly adjusted her mood and responded with a smile. The black-haired young man did not comment on the answer given by Nuayer. After a moment of silence, Luo Ya asked again, I can't sleep. I can't sleep. It's almost dawn, so I want to make breakfast. I'll be back soon. Muttering the blonde girl's words, Luo Ya slowly stood up and touched her chest. She could not help but feel an inexplicable sense of relief. Using the erosion that was like a deadly toxin as a detector, this was the reason why Luo Ya could detect Nuayer's condition in advance. At this time, in the chest that was once penetrated, an unprecedented pain was spreading, and the passage to Altacia was completely closed. Nuayer, let me see your eyes. The black-haired young man stood up and slowly approached. His request made the girl who had her back facing him tremble slightly, not knowing what to do. The blonde girl did not move, and Luo Ya did not say anything. Silence pervaded between the two. After a long time, the princess who gritted her teeth finally turned her head and looked at the young man with a calm expression. Separate? Am I bothering you? You are now seriously injured. Even if the Angel King appears again, you won't be able to fight anymore. You are no longer of much help to me. Thank you for everything you have done for me, but now I think it's better for you to return to the rear. It's safer there. Hearing Nuayer's words, the black-haired young man stopped in his tracks. However, what she did not expect was that after a short silence, Luo Ya raised her head, and there was no anger in her golden eyes. Instead, there was warmth and calmness. Wait. This is? A gift? The black-haired young man sighed slightly. Looking at the surprised Nuayer, he smiled and sent a blessing. Nuayer, happy birthday. Chapter 427. Princess Nuayer, Heathcliff's birthday was a major event in the Saint Maester theocracy. Every year, she was responsible for contacting the local nobles and consolidating the royal family's power. It could be said that it was a political gathering, and when it wasn't celebrated as a gathering, it seemed to have lost its meaning. However, Luo Ye didn't forget about it in such a difficult period. This also showed that the young man didn't treat this day as a social tool like most people. Instead, he sincerely remembered it in his heart. Wait, I'm happy that you remembered my birthday. But what is this chain? The black-haired young man looked at the chain that he obtained from the Witch Queen and explained. However, the hidden meaning in his words made the blonde girl's body stiffen. Yes, in the last battle, that guy left some power in my body. 1 second, remember. The moment she learned about the young man's condition, Nge couldn't help but feel slightly dizzy. No one in the world knew better than her what the remaining power of the angel meant. Because of this, just as Luo Ye expected, the young girl's reaction was extremely strong. An order? Then I should obey it. But sorry, I refuse to do so this time. Hearing the young man's rare refusal, the blonde girl was anxious, but there was nothing she could do. Although Nge was the one who Luo Ye swore loyalty to, the young girl hadn't inherited the throne yet, so she didn't have the authority to enforce orders. It was impossible to let Nge leave alone. Whether it was the Angel King or the vicious hands of the Eric family, the young girl couldn't fight against them alone. In order to completely change the young girl's fate, Luo Ye had to convince her. This was the first time Luo Ye showed an unimaginable strength in front of Nge. The sudden change surprised the young girl, and her blue eyes met with the young man's golden pupils. It was a calmness that was willing to give up everything. I know you're worried about me, so you want me to leave. But I also want to tell you that I've never wanted to die. I'm accompanying you so that you can obtain victory, so that the future we want can be realized. Impossible, because you are Nge Heathcliff. Facing the young lady's question, the black-haired youth resolutely replied. There wasn't the slightest bit of hesitation in his words. He caressed the young lady's cheek and looked straight into her eyes. You are the only one with the atavistic bloodline in the Heathcrete family in 1,000 years. You are the princess of the theocracy of Saint Maester and the brightest star in the history of the Vatican. You are kind, upright, and tenacious. You can even change the fate of people like me. The King of Angels. He may have been great once, but the times have changed. The dragons have disappeared without a trace, and the angels are no longer around. The remnants of him may be able to stop you for a while, but you will eventually defeat him. And I'm very sure of that. Looking at the young man who was speaking, Nge was speechless. In Luo Ye's shining golden eyes, the young lady didn't see a hint of a joke. On the contrary, she saw a serious and calm expression. So, a person can trust others to this extent? At this moment, Noelle suddenly felt something heavy pressing down on her, but it was not the feeling of a burden. Instead, it was as stable and reassuring as a sea-stabilizing needle. It was a kind of joy that suppressed the anxiety and uncertainty in her heart. Because you are my lord and the most important person to me. I dare to say that I know your future better than anyone else in the world. You sound like a prophet. But indeed, I am your lord, and also your protector. As someone who should protect you, I can't let you down. Now that things have come to this, you can't leave even if you want to. In fact, after saving Nge, Luo Ye always felt that something was missing from the young lady. She was no longer as confident and strong as before. But now, after Luo Ye's encouragement, the young lady angel's heart was once again whole, and this was his biggest goal. How troublesome. But this should be enough. The unexpected situation made Luo Ye reveal a surprised expression. The young man who lost his balance because of the pull could only reach out his hand to support himself on the door. Amidst the dull sound, Luo Ye raised his head and saw the young lady's smiling face right in front of him. Realizing that something was wrong, the young man's face stiffened. The blonde young lady raised her hand and looked at the holy white shackles and chains with a smile. Wait, you said you wanted the chains, right? I also have handcuffs on my hands. Besides, don't you like them? You hateful rebellious minister. It was best to give a birthday gift in line with the other party's preferences. This was a common sense no matter which world it was in. But just as the right thing was not necessarily right, the commonly accepted common sense would sometimes fail. The failure this time was a good proof. This was probably Luo Ye's intuition. Luoya asked Altacia to create this curse vessel. The original intention was to give it as a gift, but it was more for the young lady's bloodline promotion. However, such a reasonable and far-sighted item was used in a way that it shouldn't be used because of the user. On the lawn, the black-haired young man, who was wrapped in a circle of chains, sat in front of the blonde young lady, looking at the sky and silently regretting his mistake. On the other side, Nuair held one end of the chain and held a spoon to persuade him. From the moment the contract lock used angel power as a medium, Luoya, whose angel power in his body was far less than the young lady, was at a disadvantage. The subsequent facts also proved that Nuair could almost completely control the chain. Next, she could do whatever she wanted. Luoya, you really don't want to eat? I don't want to eat. Then untie the chain. The young lady smiled happily and refused Luoya's request. Then, she leaned down and lifted her hair, revealing her white neck and delicate collarbone. She put her face close to the young man's ear and whispered softly. I refuse. Wait, what are you going to do? Looking at Nuair's white and slender body, Luoya's brain couldn't help but heat up. His heart beat violently, and his breathing quickened. As a man, his male instincts began to awaken, making the young man's conditioned reflexively feel that something bad was going to happen. The angel who was wholly in front of others was now flushed red, and her eyes were like silk. That unique temperament, the feeling of holy and evil mixed together, was like a poison with an unimaginable charm. Especially with her identity as the successor of the Holy See, there was an additional layer of forbidden temptation. Facing such a Nuair, Luoya was utterly defeated. On the other side, the blonde young lady's foot had already lightly stepped on the young man's thigh. No, this isn't the problem. Wait, I'll eat. Aren't you going to feed me? I'll take it, so stop. Luoya, who felt that he would explode if stepped on, hurriedly stopped the punishment that was about to go out of control. After losing the reason to punish, the blonde young lady pondered for a moment, and after regaining her senses, she retracted her slender leg. Immediately after, another round of losing control. The angel who couldn't control herself grabbed onto the end of the chain, not allowing Luoya to retreat. The young man also completely stopped resisting, and after a long time of entanglement, the two of them separated slightly while panting. It's just the appetizer. After experiencing 2 accidents, Luoya finally had a meal. This time, the Nuair didn't cross the boundary, and instead gently helped the young man fill his stomach. This was because the young lady knew that if the two of them continued, it would be difficult to take back the spilt water. There was no problem with the doctrine that the life born from the union with the person in love was a gift from the goddess. However, for Luoya and Nuair, it was still a little too early for them to reach adulthood after only 1 year. More importantly, the current situation of the royal family was more important. Tomorrow will be the final moment, right? After lunch, on the lawn, the black-haired young man asked about the time. The Nuair felt the bloodline in her body and nodded lightly. The two of them leaned against each other, silently listening to each other's heartbeats. The black-haired young man gazed towards the west, feeling the call from the source substance channel. His flashing golden eyes seemed to pierce through space and landed on the enemies who were rushing over from afar. His gaze was as sharp as a blade as he brandished his weapon. Tomorrow was the day where their fates intersected. Chapter 428. Little guy, you're here? In the valley, a black-haired young man stood on a rock, looking up at the golden-haired woman he hadn't seen for a long time. After clearing his mind, he nodded gently and turned his head to observe the surroundings. He looked at the familiar place that he had visited several times, and his eyes were filled with pity. But now, the once dark valley no longer existed, and the continuous mountains were cut off. Everything had been eroded by the golden light, and most of Paytila's true form was gradually disintegrating as part of the earth. How is it? You haven't seen me in this form for a long time, right? Do you miss it? You can say that. Although my true form is a world serpent, it's not convenient for me to be in that form in front of Shia. That's why I have a human form. Facing Paytila, Luoya acted as if he was accompanying an elder, and there wasn't a trace of impatience in his expression. In fact, to the young man, Paytila was different from Altacia, who was like a rival, and Gulandair, who was like a close friend. Paytila was more like a mother to him. 1 second to remember. Luo Ye cherished this unique relationship very much, and it was because of this that the young man found it hard to bear when he saw Paytila's true form disintegrating. The Earth Mother also noticed this, and to a certain extent, the conversation between the two was also a form of enlightenment. My strength is close to Shiya's, so my compatibility with angels is better. I didn't expect to be at a disadvantage because of this, but fortunately, I managed to block it. I won't be able to accompany you in the next battle, but that stinky bone can still move. He's very strong, and it shouldn't be a problem if you guys work together. Yes, I understand. You're very smart. You must have thought of what I said a long time ago, but I couldn't help but say it again. Otherwise, I wouldn't be at ease. I don't agree with you saving that angel girl, but I can understand. But I still think that elf girl is better. But it's okay. With me around, no matter how many wives you have in the future, you can take care of them. Sensing the sudden change in the topic, the young man's face stiffened, and he didn't know what to say. Fortunately, the Earth Mother didn't pursue the matter. After a few more words of advice, Paytila stopped talking, and Luo Ye knew that time was almost up. After thinking for a moment, the young man took the initiative to step forward and hugged Earth Mother's body. After a short daze, the golden-haired woman returned the hug. Yes, I will. Not long after his consciousness, he returned to reality. The moment he opened his eyes, Roha was in a warm room. The valley and the Mother Goddess were far away from him. They were replaced by the morning sun and the blonde angel who hasn't woken up yet. Chapter 429. Under the setting sun, the black-haired young man and the man in the distance looked at each other with killing intent between them. The appearance of the old enemy represented the end of fate. This was the conclusion of Brian, who had lived for a long time. On the other side, the black-haired young man obviously had the same thought. Brian didn't hide anything this time, no matter if it was his face or aura. The reason was very simple, because this operation was a desperate gamble. Luo Ye's question didn't need to be answered, but the young man's calmness was somewhat out of Brian's expectation. And what was even more strange was that looking at Brian, who came to kill him, Luo Ye's eyes didn't have any hatred or disgust. Instead, there was some inexplicable sorrow and sorrow. The things that you should have held on to are worn away too quickly, and the things that you should have given up are not worn away. Ambition and desire are always expanding. Everything that happened 200 years ago still hasn't come to an end. To you, this is probably a very long time. Frederick. Hearing the young man said his former name, Luo Ye's pupils suddenly contracted. Brian's gaze was like an arrow, staring at the young man's body. His expressionless face finally had a fluctuation for the first time. 200 years had passed. Not to mention his contemporaries, even his younger generation had mostly left this world. And in this long time, Brian's face had changed several times. Luo Ye, as a young man who wasn't even 20 years old, it was impossible for him to know his identity. Looking at the black-haired young man, Brian asked with a gloomy face. An ominous premonition emerged in his heart. Hearing his question, Luo Ye remained silent. After a moment, he opened his mouth and said, "But unfortunately, time flies. Things remain the same, but people have changed. The fierce tiger has disappeared and the night has turned into a cold, venomous snake." Facing Brian's question, the black-haired young man replied with a heavy voice. The middle-aged man's face finally changed. The shock in his heart made the middle-aged man's heart waver. He understood that his plan wouldn't go smoothly. But then the killing intent in his eyes became stronger. "It doesn't matter, he hasn't lost yet. I didn't expect you to know my identity in advance. But unfortunately, fate isn't on your side. The appearance of the primordial monsters changed everything. Your plan will be disrupted." Quantity? Although the outcome of a battle between extraordinaires was not decided by numbers, one against many would still increase the difficulty. Furthermore, Luo Ye's source rank was not considered high. However, what puzzled Brian was that the young man remained calm after hearing his words. He just looked up at the sky and spoke in a gentle and calm voice. A faint smile appeared on the young man's face, causing Brian to frown involuntarily. However, before he could issue an order, a drastic change had already occurred that left everyone dumbfounded. Sturdy and broad, the shield was dyed with a layer of blood red by the light. Fine and heavy, it was a sharp blade that ordinary transcendence could not wield. The sound of clashing armor and the sound of footsteps echoed. On the fluttering flag, the symbol of the eye of the flame of Akate seemed to penetrate the hearts of the people. Of course, for the cultists other than Brian, the other flag was more attention-grabbing and terrifying. Chapter 430. On the plains under the setting sun, holy light and blood rain entangled in the sky. The stench of burning earth filled the air. A battle that would protect the future and decide the turning point of humanity's fate entered its climax without anyone noticing. On the other side, the crazy cultists and the rebellious noble families represented chaos. Killing everyone and dragging the human world into a chaotic world was their wish. In their eyes, human lives were worthless. Once they succeeded, there would be no more pursuit and escape. Killing would be as natural as breathing in the world. Survival would be completely determined by the strong and the weak. In Luo Ya's previous life, there was a saying, king against king, general against general. However, in reality, this kind of situation occurred most often on a chessboard and not on a real battlefield. As for Luo Ya, as a person who was obviously inferior to Brian in the source level, it was obviously inappropriate for him to fight. Therefore, when the battle began, the head of the tribunal, Hanks, stood beside Luo Ya and was prepared to fight with one of the 5 noble families. However, what he did not expect was that Luo Ya's choice was not to retreat, but to face the attack. Amidst the clashing of swords and screams, the black-haired young man looked ahead and said calmly. The red-haired man frowned. This time, my mission is to protect your safety. As the head of the tribunal, killing cultists is my duty, and you must live. Perhaps sensing the doubts of the people around him, the black-haired young man looked ahead and said calmly, the fate of our enemies is important. Although our fated enemies are important, we need victory more than anything else. The black-haired young man looked into the distance, his golden pupils carrying a certain conviction, as if he had seen something that others could not. At the same time, floating gray particles began to spread across Brian's body. Destruction and chaos appeared out of thin air in the heart, like an invisible hand shaking people's faith. The gray gas shrouded Brian's body, causing all the soldiers near him to retreat in fear. The cultists also fled in fear. The heavy and oppressive atmosphere made it difficult for people to breathe until a bloody light appeared behind everyone. Luo Ya Akate's golden pupils lit up as if they were burning. He looked across half the battlefield and stared at the blond man. Both of their faces were cold and calm. In their eyes, there was nothing but each other and boiling murderous intent. The bloody light continued to push forward, followed by the relief and joy of the soldiers on their side. Witnessing the scene of the two forces pressing against each other, Hank's expression changed abruptly. Whether he admitted it or not, it was a fact that Brian Eric had obtained an unimaginable power that might have come from the gods. And just as Luo Ya said, only the gods could defeat the gods. After realizing this, the soldiers around Luo Ya had no choice but to retreat. The silent head of the tribunal led the soldiers to the other enemies, wanting to eliminate the others before helping Luo Ya. And on Brian's side, there was no one around the blond man. At this moment, the strange gray fog surrounding Brian's body suddenly thickened at a speed visible to the naked eye. The rising gray fog connected to the sky, releasing an ominous aura. The thick death aura was visible to the naked eye. Even the cultists were shocked when they saw it. Seeing such an unimaginable and incomprehensible scene, even the tribunal, who had been fighting the cultists for many years, turned pale. At this moment, everyone finally understood what the gray fog around Brian's body was made of. However, this terrifying scene may have frightened others, but the black-haired young man did not cower. Not to mention fighting, just looking up at him would make one feel insignificant. Looking at him for even a little longer would cause severe pain. Unobservable, untouchable. There was no need for words. These had been firmly engraved in everyone's hearts. Instead of killing all the enemies, the best way to end this war was to defeat them. This was the consensus between Luo Ye and Brian. Apart from that, the blonde man also had a reminder from another person. This wasn't because he was afraid of the enemy, nor was it because he didn't have confidence in himself, but it was a cold fact. Whether it was his ability or his body, he was greatly weakened. If it was fueled from the time of the Gemini War, Roha would have some confidence, but now the situation has changed. Limbs, internal organs, and various other body parts were constantly squirming together. This was what Luo Ye saw in Brian's eyes. Even the tribunal, who was used to seeing life and death, would be horrified to see such a scene. However, the black-haired young man was not frightened because he already knew that Brian's body must have some secrets. After the Gemini War, the Eric family had fallen. Third Eric's death could not be faked, and it could not be faked. The ability to resurrect a person from the dead was something that even a cult could not do. Only a god could do that. Brian Eric. This person's death was witnessed by Luo Ye, and it was Brian who killed him to appease the public's anger. So, what did it mean for his soul to appear in this disgusting fog? A battle between extraordinaries was not only a contest of strength, but also a contest of intellect. The moment Luo Ye deduced this, he understood that the chaotic battlefield was perhaps the best place for Brian to display his abilities. The moment Brian pulled out the blade, his entire body's spirit seemed to have concentrated on a single point. The ability of his bloodline began to operate. The curse power penetrated into his flesh and blood, giving him explosive power that was far beyond the usual. The explosive acceleration only lasted for a split second. Brian's body moved from stillness to movement without any preparation. Countless vengeful spirits were entwined around him as he dashed towards the youth. However, the black-haired youth's face showed no signs of panic as he faced the sword that was pointed at him. Boom! Dust and gravel rose into the sky, obscuring vision. Countless cracks extended in all directions along the Gulandayer's attack. The people who were in the middle of the battle were affected by the shockwave and had to stop temporarily. The cultists, heretics, and the soldiers of the Inquisition could not help but look at the center of the battlefield. In their eyes, this attack seemed to be able to determine the outcome. It was a sword made of gray smoke, with a strong and ominous aura. The squirming gray smoke on the sword seemed to have a life of its own. It rushed towards the man who was seriously injured because he blocked the attack. At that moment, there was a wail in the air. A moment later, it gradually subsided as the man recovered from his injuries. The consumable type was the most troublesome enemy for Luo Ye now. The erosion of the angelic power in his chest was ongoing at every moment. Luo Ye's condition would worsen over time. He was now only at source level 4, but Brian seemed to have turned into an immortal. The only thing he could do now was to go all out. At this moment, heaven and earth seemed to have become a cage. Thick cold air gushed out with the power to freeze everything. The stars and moon in the sky disappeared. The rapidly falling temperature stained the armor of the soldiers with white frost. The blood of the cultists was also frozen. In the middle of the mist, Gurandal's arms extended backward. The rolling crimson curses shone brightly. Under the illumination of the light, the gigantic skeleton looked like an ancient demon god. Its fist was as unstoppable as a mountain. In the mix of red light and cold air, Brian's expression changed drastically. He roared and used all his strength to release layers of gray smoke. The rapidly expanding fog turned into a palm that seemed to come from hell. It met the giant's attack head-on. However, the Gulandayer was unmoved. And the facts proved everything. Countless souls surged out from the gray fog and charged upwards. However, under the fist of the giant, all of them were like mantises trying to stop a chariot. The expanding fog burst like a balloon. The giant's arm continued to move forward, accompanied by the sound of exploding souls. Until the end of the attack, the golden-haired man was sent flying back into the darkness like a bullet amidst the crisp sound of the blade breaking. Looking at the blond man in the sky, Luo Ye's golden pupils suddenly flashed. He raised his hand, and the white cold air penetrated the sky like a ray of light. It then turned into a white palm, wrapped the blond man's body, and smashed him down to the plain below. In the loud noise, Brian, who was covered in frost, fell heavily to the ground. Luo Ya's figure shot out like lightning and chased after the blond man on the ground. On the ground in the distance, the blond man's frozen body seemed to have shattered. "Well done." A familiar voice of praise sounded in Brian's ears. The next moment, the young man suddenly stopped in his tracks. Chapter 431. Amidst the freezing air that covered the sky, the black-haired young man's body was like an arrow that was released from a bow. Behind him, the heresy army raised their swords and cheered. The judge's morale was also greatly boosted. The battle between the two didn't last long, but in this short period of time, Luo Ya and Brian displayed spells that were far beyond anyone's imagination. Especially the power of the Gulandair, which deeply shocked everyone present. Was Brian Eric, or Ferd Eric, such a weak enemy? Luo Ya didn't have Pei Tila's blessing on him, which meant that he was only at the 4th level of source rank. Although he and the Gulandair used all their strength to attack, and the frozen Earthmaker had almost no defensive means, under normal circumstances, there would be some unexpected situations when facing a 2nd-level source rank expert, let alone Brian. Thinking of this, the young man didn't dare to be careless. He stopped and stretched out his hands again. Without any allies nearby, the freezing air was finally released by Luo Ya. The white air in the sky squeezed up and down, as if converging into a giant mouth that could swallow everything, and pounced on the man on the ground. However, this time, Luo Ya miscalculated. On the empty plains, a third person's voice suddenly sounded. A man in a long robe that was formed from gray fog appeared beside Brian. The moment the black-haired youth saw him, the pupils of the golden-haired man suddenly shrank, while the golden-haired man on the ground had a calm expression. The Collector was the nickname given to the leader of the organization by the members of the Appraisal Association. No one knew his identity, and no one had seen his face. For more than 100 years, Brian had only met him in that dark room. He seemed to be omniscient, but he also seemed to be hiding from something. The blood in his body seemed to boil with the power of the curse. The source material of the crown trembled uncontrollably as if it felt hostility. At this moment, the crown stone emitted a violent light. Under the full activation, the ancient beast seemed to have been revived by Luo Ya's hands. The freezing air was suddenly activated, and it turned into a beam of light that cut through the night sky. Just like that, the touch of frigid earth continued to move forward as if nothing could stop it. Everything seemed to end with this attack. But what the young man didn't expect was that the gray figure that suddenly appeared didn't dodge. Instead, it faced the freezing air head-on. Ever since it became Luo Ya's skill, whether it was against a god or a human, the freezing air that had never failed seemed to have failed this time. The light attack didn't freeze the enemy, but instead retreated to the sides. In the dark space in the distance, the man's main body looked at the young man in the image and stretched out his hand. However, at the moment when the two sides touched, the source of the crown in Roha's body suddenly changed. The intense trembling stopped inexplicably and the shining light gradually dimmed. The black-haired boy's eyes widened as he felt a strange feeling. I remember this place. The candlelight was still shining in the darkness, but a hand had reached out from the darkness. It appeared silently, but it seemed like it had always been there. As the hand approached the candlelight, a strong sense of uneasiness appeared in the young man's heart. This thought appeared almost instinctively in Luo Ya's heart, but he couldn't move. His body couldn't feel, and his consciousness was hazy. Everything told Luo Ya that in this dark space, he was just a bystander. At this moment, Luo Ya suddenly felt a bone-piercing cold, as if the disappearance of the candlelight had taken away his warmth. The flickering candlelight seemed to be struggling, but the boundless darkness became heavier and heavier. Finally, everything returned to normal. It was also at this moment that the black-haired young man's consciousness returned to his body, accompanied by the sudden stop of his blood. How is this possible? Chapter 432. On the plains, Brian looked at the huge skeleton walking past him. In the dark space, The man with a blurry face also turned around and prepared to leave. From their point of view, they had achieved their goal, and there was no need to pay attention to the gradually blurring youth. When the freezing of his bloodline and source substance stopped, he lost the protection of the gods and was hit by Brian's gray fog. His fate was already sealed. In fact, Luo Ya's figure had indeed begun to dissipate and was no longer moving. However, what the two of them didn't know was that the youth's consciousness still existed at this moment. Something had to be done. But the problem was, how could the crown, the king's blood, be interfered with? Death was scary, but what was even scarier was the result after death. Without his protection, the heresy army and the judges who could not fight against the gods would be completely annihilated. And behind everyone, the princess that the young man swore to protect would also die. What you lack is the core of your faith. Remember it in a second. Active mutation. This was the foundation of stepping into this darkness. Only by finding the core of oneself and reactivating the power of the Akit family would Luo Ya have a chance of survival. Hanks was a devout believer, so he used his faith as the core and practiced it in his life. Then, did Luo Ya have something to support him as well? It was in the Dark Palace. At the end of the building, a man with blonde hair and blue eyes stood. His handsome face was like a sculpture in art, but there was also a unique rebellious and untamed air about him. Dark clouds rolled in the sky, and flashing lightning illuminated his figure, allowing the youth to see his face clearly. The moment he saw Vader, Luo Ya widened his eyes in surprise. He didn't understand why he saw his figure. Such a question flashed through the youth's mind, but he immediately denied it. This was because the moment he saw Vader, a scorching heat suddenly appeared in his body, as if it was resisting the power that was dragging him into the darkness. It was also at this moment that Luo Ya suddenly felt as if he had grasped something crucial. I see. It's because of a certain similarity. Prince Vader was Luo Ya's former enemy. The two of them were very different in terms of personality, ideals, and many other aspects. They were even contradictory. However, these two people who were as incompatible as fire and water had a part in common, and that was resistance. Luo Ya, you're rebelling against fate. The holy capital was engulfed in the flames of war, the majestic ocean, the despairing and chaotic academy, the all-devouring calamity was baring its fangs and brandishing its claws in front of him. Even the strongest human beings were trying to kill him. The Messiah, the Mother Goddess, each and every one of the highest existences wanted to kill him. However, just like the ancestors of the Akit family, even though the fate of death followed him like a shadow, it was unable to suppress his head. Rebelling and changing fate, this is my core. Boundless power began to converge and pulsate. In the dark space, it was as if a candle flame that was about to be extinguished suddenly flickered despite the absence of wind. The flickering candle flame burned brighter and brighter, finally bursting out with an intense radiance. The black-haired youth strode forward, reached out his hand and grabbed the palm in the darkness, as if he was grabbing the throat of fate. Under the illumination of the light, the black-haired youth's eyes were like candlelight. He looked directly at the figure in the darkness, his voice flat but unquestionable. It's time for you to return what you've taken away. Chapter 433. Luo Ya was defeated. Just a minute ago, the black-haired boy was still chasing after Brian, who was sent flying by the giant. He planned to launch a final attack, but in just a few seconds, everything had taken a turn for the worse. Looking at the gray figure that disappeared after the attack and Brian who stood up, everyone understood that this was a conspiracy. Brian and the others' target was the black-haired boy from the beginning, and it turned out that they had succeeded. Everything happened so suddenly that even the pagans did not have time to react. Cynthia, who was holding a shield, was stiff. Rodney, who was waving a long sword, also stopped. The white-haired would looked into the distance, as if he still could not believe what he had seen. Brian had a powerful divine power, which was difficult for the pagans and the Inquisition to fight against. As long as Luo Ya died, there would be no more suspense in this battle. In the eyes of the red-haired man, Luo Ya was indeed on the verge of death. His power was sealed by the strange gray mist figure, and his body was gradually being erased over time. Even so, the boy still had a chance. Recalling the boy who came all the way to the border with him, Hank's eyes gradually calmed down. He had seen too many young talents, but he felt that only Luoya would not die here. This was his confidence in his vision. Before he could advance, he must buy time. Crack. At this moment, the collector suddenly felt a sharp pain in his arm. Everything around him instantly dimmed, and the flickering candlelight appeared beside him. Under the candlelight, the black-haired boy had already grabbed his wrist. The cold spell extended along his body, and his cold eyes were mixed with murderous intent. In an instant, the man suddenly withdrew his arm, and the cold air had covered half of his body. In the dark space, the boy had also taken back his bloodline and glory. To be able to capture his body in that world, it meant that the young awakened had found his own essence, the root of his beliefs. No one in the Holy Church could extinguish his candlelight, and the king's blood would be completely activated. The man in the room stared at the shining light on the medium in silence. In the distant plains, in Brian's blue eyes, incomprehensible things were also emerging. Kings standing with swords, ferocious beasts, holy angels and dragons spreading their wings, and ancient creatures flashed past one by one. Gods and demons also turned into fleeting clouds as the pressure kept increasing. Finally, a glowing figure appeared. The moment he appeared, even the most ferocious villains trembled like children who had done something wrong. Devout believers called out his name. The moment he saw the scene in the sky, the man's body and mind trembled, and the gray mist also scattered in fear. Hanks looked at the strange scene, and hurriedly lowered his head, and his eyes were full of shock. The ancient bloodline awakened and displayed its ancient glory. His frozen body began to burn. The black-haired youth looked up at the sky. The shining figure reached out a warm hand to touch his head. As the origin substance of the conch trembled, he seemed to see the goddess in the light smiling warmly at him. "You have received Shia's blessing." Chapter 434. At the mountain range at the end of the Tark Plains, a violent earthquake stopped the soldiers who were repairing the fortifications. The people who came and went crouched down to stabilize themselves. The demons in the mountains were restless, and flocks of birds were circling the sky. Under the support of the crimson lightning and the shard of the crown, the mighty power of the gods once again shone upon the world after so many years. Under the concentrated attack of Granadar's full power, the evil god that was like a gray fog was defeated. The black slash that wiped out everything was also burned and shattered inch by inch under the attack of the lightning. Countless remnant souls were reduced to dust, and the golden-haired man who was the instigator of all this also met his end. The moment he sighed in his heart, the lightning struck the man in the face. The red light that drowned everything also wrapped him in it. The blade in his hand was completely shattered, and he could no longer feel his body. However, under the bombardment of the red lightning, Brian's face was not filled with pain and resentment, but a moment of absent-mindedness. "Your Highness," boom! The soldiers put their shields in front of them and lowered their bodies. The judges also prostrated themselves on the ground. The cultists who sensed that the situation was not good jumped up and tried to escape. However, the red lightning that fell from the sky became the knell of death, burning all the villains who were not protected by the group's skills into ashes. 1 second to remember. The aftermath of the battle between the two swept across the plains and lasted for a long time. When the wind gradually subsided, the light disappeared, and the lightning and dark clouds were far away, Luoya opened his eyes again and looked at his own body. At this time, the plains had turned into sand under the impact of the divine power, and the golden-haired man was lying in the sand. The powerful aura of the man had disappeared. His body that had survived a long time was now full of holes. However, after losing the evil god and the souls, there was nothing left to replenish him. In the face of the red lightning, Brian didn't try to avoid it, he didn't even try to fight back. He just silently endured it as if it wasn't unacceptable for him to fall. When Roja saw the man's eyes, he understood everything. Red lightning roar. That's His Highness' skill. I'm not him. A short answer, followed by a sigh of disappointment after a silence. The golden-haired man's eyes flashed with disappointment, and Luo Ye continued. I see. You don't seem to mind that I defeated him? His Highness doesn't hold grudges. It's an acknowledgement that he gave you the skill. I'm his knight. His acknowledgement is the principle that I need to follow. Perhaps it's my destiny to die in your hands. Looking at the man who was burning his life to the end, Luo Ye responded indifferently. There was no pity in his heart. He only sighed at the complexity and changeability of human nature. Luo Ye didn't know why Brian chose to be resurrected. Perhaps it was to avenge his old master, perhaps it was because of the regret of his family's decline, or perhaps it was because of his persistence in success. But no matter what, the young man knew that he had lost his original heart, and his journey had come to an end. Nu-Air is actually his descendant. The moment the young man said those words, the golden-haired man opened his eyes slightly and looked at the young man in front of him. In the haze, he seemed to see the figure of a golden-haired knight holding a long sword. So that's how it is. Did Knight lose to Knight? Be careful of that person. He knows you very well. Who is he? Do you know his identity? The drifting dust was blown away by the night wind. Under the dusky sky, Brian ended his life full of twists and turns. The old enemy of the Akot family for more than 100 years was gone. The burning flames of karmic retribution slowly extinguished, and an era came to an end. Luo Ye didn't want to think too deeply about Brian's good deeds and evil deeds. To the young man, Brian was just one of the many enemies. Perhaps if Vader didn't die, Brian could become a loyal subordinate as Felder. But that was nothing more than a wild guess. The black-haired young man sighed. The man's bones were burned to ashes, and the tiger flag was burned as well. After more than 100 years, everything was no longer the same as before. After saying goodbye, the young man turned around and walked away in the sandstorm. The battle between Luo Ye and Brian wasn't long or short, but the outcome in the process could be described as shocking. On the plains, after experiencing the aftermath of the Gulandayers' attack and witnessing the death of Brian, the vice president of the Appraisal Association, the cultists who followed Luo Ye here were in a complete panic. Those who tried to escape were killed on the spot by the heresy army and the judges, and most of them surrendered immediately. Whether it was the appearance of Shiya's phantom in the sky, or the power displayed by the Gulandayer, all of them dealt a heavy blow to the cultist spirits. After the successive attacks, many of them had completely lost their will to fight. When they saw Luo Ye return, their legs trembled and they collapsed on the ground. Looking at Luo Ye, who had broken through to level 3 of the source rank, a rare smile appeared on Hank's face. The judges, who were serious in speech and manner, also showed respect. As someone who could draw out Shiya's phantom, Luo Ye's status in the hearts of these devout Shiya believers rose rapidly. In terms of ability, the young man had proven himself with his battle achievements. Looks like you've found the root of your beliefs. Very good. Count Hanks, what you said gave me a lot of inspiration. That's why I was able to break through successfully. Thank you. The serious man calmly rejected this sudden achievement, making Luo Ye not know whether to laugh or cry. After a brief exchange, the black-haired young man turned his head and looked into the depths of the plains. Hanks also fell into silence. Both of them knew that it was not over yet. But of course, Luo Ye would not let that happen, and he had already made preparations for it. Well, it's my job to deal with criminals. It was the holy city floating in the clouds, emitting a holy white light. Clouds and mist lingered around it, and the sun shone on it, making people feel warm just by looking at it. Tranquility and peace flowed in their hearts like a warm current. It was the legendary City of Angels, a magnificent building built by the gods in ancient times. It floated in the clouds, symbolizing the authority of the messengers of God, and also represented the glory bestowed by Shiya. The moment she arrived, solemn music sounded in her ears. The people coming and going stopped in their tracks and bowed to her with a smile. Under the respectful escort of the crowd, the blonde girl walked all the way. She walked past the majestic city tower and crossed one door after another. After a wide corridor, there was a meeting hall with 7 chairs. 7 archangels. The 7 archangels walked past one by one, but after shaking their heads in denial, their expressions became more and more respectful. They clustered around the blonde girl and smiled as they led her deeper into the city. The moment Nua Ayers saw the woman on the throne, there was a sudden restlessness in her body. A strong sense of intimacy broke out in her body, and when she saw the blonde girl, the holy and beautiful woman on the throne's solemn expression thawed. She stood up and smiled as she walked forward. Looking at the queen walking towards her, Nua Ayers' mind gradually went blank. The restlessness of her blood made her emotional, and the strong sense of intimacy seemed to tell her that the person in front of her was an existence that she could completely trust. In the depths of her heart, a strange feeling began to rise. The emotions in the girl's heart were in a mess, and on the other side, the holy queen extended her hand and smiled an invitation. After hesitating for a moment, Nua Ayers finally responded. But the moment she extended her hand, the girl's eyes involuntarily stared at her wrist, and an inexplicable question emerged in her heart. There was something missing here. Chapter 435. Inside the holy palace, the gentle light shone in all directions. Under the throne, the attendants and guards bowed their heads respectfully. The 7 archangels surrounded the girl with a smile. The king with a kind face reached out her hand, waiting for the girl to respond. However, under everyone's gaze, the blonde girl looked at her wrist in front of her in a daze. Such a question arose in Nua Ayers' heart. The surging blood cooled down slightly, and the surging emotions in her heart stopped slightly. The girl surrounded by everyone suddenly frowned. She looked at her smooth wrist and inexplicably felt that something was wrong. She seemed to have forgotten something important. Thinking about this problem, the girl who suddenly felt a headache withdrew her hand and held her forehead. A few inexplicable images suddenly flashed in her mind. However, before she could think of anything, her shoulder was suddenly held. The girl who suddenly woke up raised her head and found that it was the blonde woman wearing a crown in front of her. She still maintained a smile on her face. She didn't seem to care about Nua Ayers' rudeness. Beside her, the handsome and beautiful angels didn't show any abnormalities. They didn't seem to see the girl's expression and slight bitterness. This time, the beautiful woman didn't wait any longer. Instead, she smiled and took the initiative to hold the young girl's hand, leading her forward. The 7 archangels followed her step by step. When they reached the platform, the young girl stopped in her tracks. Meanwhile, more and more angels poured out from both sides. She seemed to have experienced such a scene before. An indescribable sense of dissonance emerged in her heart, making the girl begin to be vigilant. The music and singing also slowly stopped at this time. The 7 archangels stepped forward one by one under the respectful gaze of the guests. They held the blonde girl with both hands and blessed her one by one. Under the layers of light, Nua Ayers' body seemed to be gushing with endless energy. After the blessings of the 7 archangels, the blonde girl turned around and looked at the woman on the throne behind her. At this time, the majestic king had a gratified smile on her face. She stood up and walked to the girl. Under everyone's gaze, she gently took off the crown on her head. Looking at the crown in the woman's hand, the blood in the girl's body surged violently. The holy white crown seemed to have a strange magic in her eyes at this moment, making her want to own it. She intuitively felt that at the moment of coronation, she would get unparalleled power and power. Holy white. Wait, the curse vessel of this color, I remember, the holy white curse vessel was indeed what she cherished and wanted to own. However, it was not this. Click. Looks like you don't need my help. Of course, who do you think I am? You hurt the most important person to me, and you still dare to appear in front of me as if nothing happened? My bloodline may indeed be inherited from you, but my power was not bestowed upon me by you. In order to reappear in the world, you had to succumb to the tyranny of divinity. What right do you have to crown me? The trembling crown floated in the air, and everything around it seemed to lose its color. The holiness of the huge palace faded away, and the light in the shining space was extinguished. Glory and power shrank towards the crown, and finally landed gently on the girl's palms. At this moment, There was a sudden uproar in the vast space. The angel kings resisted the pressure and stepped forward to stop them. The 7 archangels were also shocked. However, all the obstacles were useless. The holy white crown had become the best endorsement, proving to everyone where honor and power belonged. Chapter 436. After a soul-stirring night, the black-haired young man and the golden-haired girl had both overcome their own difficulties and defeated their fated enemies. When they returned to the familiar wooden house, the two of them looked at each other and sighed with emotion. "You've advanced to Source Level 3? So it's like this. I thought I could suppress you with my strength, but now it's another starting line? But it's better to be safe than sorry. Congratulations on your successful advancement." The black-haired boy shook his head helplessly. This incident gave him a new understanding of the so-called Chosen One. After breaking through the bloodline and source level, Nuair's combat power had increased exponentially. In fact, even Luoya wouldn't dare to say he could win against her. After recognizing the strength of Nuair, the black-haired boy was relieved. However, a question flashed through the boy's mind. Luoya vaguely remembered that Nuair's bloodline didn't seem to be this strong in the recorder's eye. The princess was stronger than expected. This was undoubtedly a good thing, but the boy didn't have a clue as to the reason for all this. The biggest factor affecting Nuair was Luoya himself, but the boy didn't do anything in this regard. Feeling the dense reaction of the curse, Luoya and Nuair tidied up their clothes and walked out of the room. When the two stepped out of the door, the blonde princess appeared in front of everyone in one piece. Uncontrollable cheers came from the crowd. After the princess was safe, the Saint Maester theocracy would regain its stability. The Vatican would once again play its role. The warriors who died in battle could finally rest in peace. All their efforts would be rewarded. Before this, Luoya's team had a fierce battle with the cultists of the Appraisal Association. Many warriors died in this battle. Nuair's face was heavy when she heard the news. However, as the head of the Inquisition, Hanks was very calm. Luoya's expression was also normal. After witnessing the strength of the enemy, the casualties now were the best result. However, all of this was in the past. With the death of Brian and the annihilation of his henchmen, the Appraisal Association had suffered a devastating blow. Without the cover provided by the Eric family, such a large cult could no longer hide in the theocracy. Roja didn't say this out of pity, and he didn't have any sympathy. In fact, the Eric family wouldn't change because of Brian's words. But he felt that as a descendant of Vader, Noelle had the right to know the fate of the man who followed her ancestor, and even when he died, she couldn't forget him. "You don't seem to sympathize with him?" The golden-haired girl sighed and raised her head. She looked at the boy beside her and asked, "Because of separation, I need to remember. But I won't. I will always be by your side." Hearing the boy's calm reply, the blonde girl's eyes widened slightly. Her cheeks flushed and her lips trembled. In the next moment, the holy white chain suddenly appeared in the girl's hand. The angel girl blushed slightly and dragged the boy in front of her. She stared into his eyes and said with embarrassment and anger. Chapter 437. On the broad road, the black-haired young man looked at the majestic buildings in front of him and sighed. It was evening, and the sunset was just like when he left. A gentle breeze blew on his face, bringing warmth. Facing this familiar scene, Luoya didn't look at it anymore. Instead, he walked forward with familiarity. The young man didn't understand why he had to spend a lot of time walking like a pilgrimage to this land. However, Altacia didn't seem to want to give in. Looking at Altacia, who raised her finger and happily answered his question, the black-haired young man couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. "It's similar. Or rather, I think our relationship is closer, isn't it? After all, the contract can't be broken. To a certain extent, our relationship is more certain and stronger." Hearing the white-haired witch's joyful words, Luoya pondered for a moment and didn't say anything. In fact, as Altacia said, Luoya and the ancient gods were almost inseparable. They were bound together for good or ill. To a certain extent, they could even be considered family, especially in this situation. Of course, This is the most difficult and dangerous victory for Sir Hero. After offering the blessings of victory to my contractor, you have successfully responded to my expectations. Then, after everything is over, it's necessary to reward you. And most importantly, make the guy who dared to humiliate me disappear completely. Completely destroy the divinity of the Angel King. Even in ancient times, almost no one could do it. Really, Sir Hero, don't tell me you think that girl alone can do it? It's you who changed her fate, just like how you found the foundation of your power. You have indeed done it, and you have also satisfied my pleasure. Yes, Sir Hero, you really never disappoint me. But, you didn't call me here just for this, right? The white-haired witch paused after hearing Luo Ya's question. The smile on her face faded a little. Below the throne, the black-haired young man also showed an expected expression. The Earth Mother, who was overflowing with maternal love, was concerned about her child after the battle. This was understandable behavior. However, the relationship between the witch and the young man was very complicated. Since Altacia was in such a hurry to see Luo Ya, there must be something she had to remind him of. And to a certain extent, Luo Ya knew what it was. Sniffing the strong ominous aura on Luo Ya, Altacia's gaze gradually sharpened as she asked. The black-haired young man recalled the previous battle and thought for a moment before concluding. Well, ever since she saw the Queen of Witches until now, this was the first time Altacia showed such a surprised expression in front of him. In the past, even in moments of life and death, this unpredictable woman was never nervous. However, this time, Luo Ya's words seemed to have impacted her, and the reason was probably the last sentence. Looking at the witch who had a much more serious expression after sitting down again, Luo Ya said almost confidently. The white-haired woman heard him and did not refute. After all, as an ancient god, Altacia had a lot of knowledge. She had also done a lot of research on the ancient bloodline of the King Selector clan. The witch had indeed heard of the meaning of the Sacred Hall. The Sacred Hall is the legendary holy land of the King Selector clan. It is also the place where the beginning and the end. However, legend has it that only those who are qualified can enter that area. Yes, I don't know the specific situation. Perhaps it is some kind of unique secret technique, or perhaps it is some kind of bloodline connection. In short, it is not a place that just anyone can enter. Chapter 438. What does it feel like to be an ordinary patient? The answer to this question was a little unfamiliar to Luo Ya. It was better to say that he hadn't felt it for a long time. Feeling the slightly hot and chaotic brain and the limbs that seemed to be filled with lead compared to usual, Luo Ya sighed helplessly. On the other side, the sound of the door opening sounded. Princess Royal Highness returned soon after leaving, and Luo Ya hurriedly closed his eyes. Although asking you to sleep is an order, you don't have to pretend to sleep. I just want you to have a good rest, not to make me happy. Hearing Nu Ayer's words, the black-haired boy's body stiffened. After hesitating for a moment, he slowly opened his eyes. He found that the girl was already sitting on the chair beside the bed with a determined expression on her face. She was obviously confident in her judgment. How many times do you think I have seen the way you sleep? We have been sleeping together for the past few days, right? How can I not be able to tell if he's really asleep? Of course, and have you forgotten that you still have my power in your body? You can't lie to me, so don't lie to me in the future, especially about your body. Thinking that there was a spy in his body, the black-haired boy promised helplessly. The girl who narrowed her eyes and warned solemnly nodded with satisfaction. Then she reached out and stroked the boy's forehead. After feeling the temperature slightly, the girl breathed a sigh of relief when she found that there was not much change. At the same time, she said apologetically, "It's okay. With Princess Royal Highness curse, it's better than nothing. I feel ashamed of myself." As for lowering the temperature, it was even less. It was better to say that because of the side effect of frozen earth, Luo Ya had more curse vessels to maintain his body temperature. Looking at the girl's hand that just stroked his forehead, the black-haired boy couldn't help but remind her. However, the blonde girl didn't care when she heard the words. She refuted it in one sentence. That's right. Luo Ya, who was a little relieved, lay on the bed honestly, looking at the ceiling and brewing sleepiness. On the other side, the blonde girl looked at the boy whose face was slightly red because of his body temperature. She thought of something, suddenly lifted a corner of the quilt, and put her hand in. Because of this unexpected attack, the black-haired boy who was relaxing suddenly widened his eyes. The surprised Luoya turned his head and looked to the side. He saw Nuair putting her arm into the quilt calmly. At the same time, the boy felt a small and cold hand lifting his clothes and going in. Sure enough, I'm sweating. Is why I can't sleep? What's with the persistence? I'm here to take care of you so that you don't have to endure these things. This is? The temperature is almost there. Get up and take off your clothes. I will help you wipe your sweat. Grabbing his quilt, the black-haired boy's face stiffened. He really didn't dare to let Nuair do this kind of servant work. However, the girl didn't mean to compromise. In the fluctuation of the curse, the holy white chain appeared faintly in the air. In front of the boy, Miss Angel once again showed an oppressive smile. Chapter 439. How many years has it been since an internal war broke out in the theocracy of Saint Mestre? Luoya felt that he had the right to answer this question. After all, he had personally experienced it last time. But what made him speechless was that after 200 years, the parties involved in the two wars were exactly the same. That's right, in this war, the Akkad and Heathcliff families were no longer passively defending. Instead, they took the initiative to attack. What was even more surprising was that according to the time of the news, St. John and the others should have made this decision immediately after the incident at Tucker Fortress. At that time, Brian, the head of the Eric family, was still alive and kicking. The war started so suddenly that when the news reached the hands of Luoya and Nuair, both of them were stunned for a moment. After all, after such a big incident at Tucker Fortress, not only did they not send reinforcements, but they also directly entered a civil war. This was really a bit unbelievable. But after thinking about it carefully, the two of them found that this was the best way to deal with it. But at this time, if they did the opposite and joined forces with the Akkad family to launch a thunderous attack, then there was a great chance that they could defeat Eric in one fell swoop in a short time. And by doing this, they could also prevent Brian from sending people to assassinate Nuair, who was far away at the border with no one to protect him. It could be said that they were killing two birds with one stone. But how did Grandpa know that the aliens didn't make any big moves here? What if the alien army comes during this period of time? I see. Although this tactic sounded correct, it required great courage and determination to make the decision to go to war under the pressure of not sending reinforcements. If there was any mistake that led to the aliens' invasion, the two of them would be sinners of their race. The pressure brought by this kind of risk was not something that ordinary people could bear. Fortunately, because of Brian's plan, he led the cultists to attack Luoya and the others and died in this place beyond the Great Wall. Otherwise, with Eric's deep roots and the secret help of the Tasting Committee, even a blitzkrieg wouldn't have been able to solve this problem in a short time. But it had to be said that this matter had a great impact on Luoya and Nuair. Now that the civil war had broken out, the two of them, as the only sons, had to hurry back. Of course, in addition to the two of them, there was also Brian, who had turned into a corpse, and a large number of cultists. These were all precious resources that the Akkad and Heathcliff families urgently needed. Although the aliens weren't fools, their IQ wasn't very high. As long as the walls were high enough, they could be intimidated to a certain extent. Of course, since there were no detailed building blueprints, Luoya could only imitate the Tark fortress from his memory. The first time he did it, he made a lot of mistakes. Fortunately, with the help of the Earth Mother, the construction progress was extremely fast. On the other hand, Nuair signed many documents in his own name and established an alliance with the representatives of the various countries who came to support him. They signed a short-term joint defense agreement for the new fortress and established a frontline command center. Of course, this was just a temporary measure. Everything was done to last until the end of the war. Once the country was stabilized, Heathcliff would lead the regular army and take over. Then, these agreements and the command center would be considered to have been completed. On the other hand, Luo Ye didn't know if it was an illusion, but he felt that the aliens wandering in the mountains had become more violent. What are you looking at? It's cold outside. Don't catch a cold. Looking at the girl who had been treating him like a patient ever since he caught a cold, Luo Ye's face showed a helpless expression. But he didn't listen to the princess's advice. Instead, he carefully examined the corpse and asked about the battle. After getting the results, his expression became more complicated. Strange. To be honest, I can't tell. But you said that they were more violent than before. Based on the season, it might be because of hunger or cold. Chapter 440. The rest of the journey went smoothly for Luo Ye and the others. Although the long journey had accumulated a lot of fatigue in the heretic army and the inquisitors, the team was more united than ever. Unlike before, the leader had given everyone a boost, making the journey a lot easier. After Nua Ayer's bloodline was upgraded, although humans couldn't feel it, the aura of the Angel King seemed to have a great influence on the higher-level monsters. These restless predators in winter didn't dare to come near, and the battle rate at night was reduced to less than half. Before dawn, the campfire was still burning in the camp. Under the light of the fire, the soldiers who were running back and forth didn't shout loudly to prepare for the journey. Instead, they were whispering to each other and laughing from time to time. The soldiers who were standing guard were different from usual. They were all smiling, and the devout inquisitors were already preparing to worship. Although I know you're tired from keeping watch at night, you can't fall asleep today. It's almost time. In the carriage before dawn, a blonde girl reached out her hand and touched the boy's cheek, waking him up with a smile. Feeling the touch on his cheek, Luo Ye gradually opened his eyes and apologized. He wasn't surprised that the girl was here. As the next Holy See of the Holy See, even if Nua Ayer couldn't make it back to the distant holy capital, he still had to spend the day according to the teachings of the church. The devout inquisitors did the same. As the biggest festival of the year, New Year was equally important to the heretic army. Naturally, they couldn't be careless about it. It could be said that it was the common wish of everyone to rest for a day. In the tragedy of Tark Fortress, hundreds of thousands of extraordinary people disappeared without a trace. This incident made both the inquisitors and the heretic warriors feel a strong sense of unease. Everyone, as witnesses of history, urgently wanted something to support them. Luo Ye didn't believe in this kind of New Year's wish activity in the past. In the past, it was basically just a formality. However, the shining figure in the sky when he was promoted to the source rank not long ago changed his mind. The warmth from the soul was still fresh in his memory. As everyone waited, the morning sun finally appeared on the horizon, emitting a dazzling radiance. At the same time, the people on the ground all closed their eyes and prayed, placing their wishes in the light, hoping to receive a response from the gods. Although it was said to be a stare, in fact, the boy didn't feel the stare. Instead, it was a feeling of being surrounded by a warm light. After a strange feeling flashed by, Luo Ye couldn't help but open his eyes. As a result, he found that the nearby crowd had already prepared to pray, and it seemed that a long time had passed. I didn't expect you to be so serious this year. You're completely different from before. Yeah, the time is already twice as long as mine. Speaking of which, don't you feel it? Facing the doubtful blonde girl, Luo Ye remained silent for a moment before shaking her head slightly. She felt that she might have seen the memories in her bloodline again. On the other side, Nua Ayer curiously inquired about the boy's wish. It's nothing. I just hope that the people around me will be safe. Recalling the departure of her loved ones, the blonde girl said with a sorrowful smile on her face. Seeing this, Luo Ye's heart ached. He thought about how to console her, but before he could say anything, a slender hand gently pinched the boy's cheek. I really forgot. It shouldn't be a problem. My wish is, I hope that I and the people I love will be safe and happy. Amidst the calm voice, Luo Ye, who was suddenly attacked, couldn't help but widen his eyes slightly. After a moment of silence, the boy looked at Nua Ayer's blue eyes, his cheeks slightly red, and replied as if he was making a promise. You will be happy. Definitely. Chapter 441. 10 days later, in the morning at the east gate of the holy city of Saint Maester, Lorraine, a group of people who had traveled a long way appeared in front of the city gate. Many of them were dressed in rags, and from their accents, it was obvious that they were not from the holy city. However, the guards at the city gate immediately let them pass after a brief inspection. Nua Iyer Heathcliff. When the princess of the Holy See appeared in front of everyone, everyone's eyes lit up. They cheered and immediately opened the city gate. Obviously, this was a rumor that was carefully designed by the Eric family to sway people's hearts. However, the effect of the rumor was very powerful. Although the Holy See did not make any announcement for more than a month, Nua Iyer's delayed appearance still deepened people's suspicions. The news of the princess's return spread like wildfire. When Luo Ya and the others entered the city, the east gate was already surrounded by the nearby residents. The knights in the city were dispatched to maintain order, but there were still more and more people coming from all over the city. The cheering crowd shouted the girl's name, and at the same time, they shouted the slogan of the royal family's victory. Puzzled, Luo Ya asked the soldiers of the city defense knights. After listening to their explanation, he realized that the Holy See had actually thought of the same idea as him. When the news was made public, the holy city was shaken. The families of tens of thousands of soldiers in the city cried and blocked the gate of the Holy See. They wanted to verify whether their loved ones were still alive. It was said that the scene at that time was extremely sad. The cries of women could be heard a few streets away. As the news spread, similar scenes were repeated all over the theocracy. Hundreds of thousands of royal family elites were killed or injured. The destruction of the century-old Tark fortress, plus the unknown fate of the royal family members. Any one of these conditions would be a heavy blow to a country. When added together, it could be said to be a devastating blow. No one in the world would use these as a price to frame someone. With such deep hatred and decisiveness, in everyone's opinion, they must have obtained decisive evidence. Therefore, although the Holy See had not announced any evidence, in the eyes of most people, this was already an ironclad case. On the spot, they were injected with adrenaline and entered the battlefield on the spot. It was like a parade in the Red Square. On the other side, the Akkad territory also responded immediately. The Akkad family's patriarch, Kadia Akkad, personally led the troops and set off on the same day as the royal family's allied army to attack Eric territory from both sides. After all, for ordinary people, the cultists were still within their scope of understanding. However, the truth of Tark Fortress being destroyed by the 6 disasters was beyond their comprehension. Once these terrifying monsters were announced, it would definitely cause a great panic. The black-haired young man thought as he moved forward. In the process, the number of people following him also reached its peak. The Holy See and the palace respectively sent troops to welcome him, but none of them were able to take the girl away. Because as the absolute ruler of the country and the Holy See, St. John was currently not in the holy capital. Brian had been famous in the Holy See for a long time. However, in terms of the origin level, he was the same as Kadia. If he colluded with the cultists and did something unexpected, it might have a great impact on the situation of the war. In fact, Brian did have the aura of an ancient evil god. St. John must have secretly gone to the front line because of this. After learning that her grandfather had secretly moved, even Nua Iyer couldn't help but show a surprised expression. However, she immediately calmed down and cooperated with the Holy See to act as if they were about to reunite. Of course, Luo Iyer also cooperated with them. In the meeting hall of the palace, the freshly brewed hot tea exuded layers of steam, dissipating the coldness of the winter. The black-haired young man looked at the battle report in front of him. After reading it, the serious expression on his face gradually disappeared. This war was a blitzkrieg that pursued speed. Therefore, whether it was St. John or Luo Iyer's father, Kadia, both of them chose the tactic of long-distance raids. The results proved to be very good, even exceeding Luo Iyer's and the others' expectations. As one of the 5 noble families that had always been deeply trusted by the royal family, the Akkad family had expanded the size of their standing army with the acquisition of a large territory 200 years ago. In terms of the number of troops, they had always been the leader of the 5 noble families. However, as the defeated party, the Eric border house had to be cautious. Recruiting troops was not easy because the army could attack. However, it was much easier to build defensive structures like fortresses. For the sensitive nerves of all parties, it was much less provocative. Whether it was to guard against monsters, bandits, or simply to station troops, all kinds of reasons could be used. Chapter 442. Outside the holy city of Lorraine's royal palace, the excited crowd had yet to disperse after hearing the news of the princess' return. The clamorous crowd was filled with joy. Meanwhile, in the royal palace's council hall, a black-haired young man was holding onto the battle report while gazing at the young lady before him. It was a pity that the princess before Luo Ye didn't show any signs of joy. Instead, she remained silent. Of course, the current civil war in the theocracy wasn't a prolonged war, nor was it a meat grinder where both sides were evenly matched. Instead, it was more like a smooth-sailing battle where one could easily gain merits. But even so, there was a part of the young lady's heart that didn't want to agree no matter what. After a brief silence, the blonde young lady clenched her fists and almost couldn't help but raise this question. However, after hearing Nu Ayer's rare question with slight anger, Luo Ye wasn't angry. Instead, he replied solemnly, "In that case, isn't there even less need to take risks? Ever since you were injured, you haven't recovered from the battles and the journey, right? Instead of worrying about the battlefield where Uncle is, why don't you calm down and recuperate?" The blonde young lady said and walked up to Luo Ye. She extended her hand to hold the young man's hand and her eyes glowed with a gentle persuasion. Looking at the princess in such a state, Luo Ye didn't know how to reject her. Now that the battle saint had left the theocracy, Nu Ayer had too many matters to attend to as the princess. For safety reasons, the young lady who had just experienced danger shouldn't head to the battlefield. After all, Prince Kai-in was no longer around and Nu Ayer was the only heir to the royal family. "Sorry, I'm afraid I can't rest yet. Although I don't care about the merits on the battlefield, there are some things that I want to confirm. The entrance to the appraisal meeting is at Eric's house. I want to take a look there." Gazing into the eyes of the black-haired young man, the blonde young lady couldn't help but tremble when she heard his intentions. Naturally, she recalled that Luo Ye had casually mentioned the chairman of the appraisal meeting, Collector. According to the explanation of the cultists, Collector had already predicted the calamity that would befall Tucker Fortress. He even took the initiative to set up a gate for the cultists in advance. That was why the cultists had the ability to enter the fortress. Absolutely not. The princess who was holding the chains pulled the young man pulled him to her front. Her slender legs knelt on the chair between Luo Ye's knees. She stared into the young man's golden eyes and spoke angrily. "Indeed, that might be the case. But there are some things that I feel are unavoidable. No matter how much I hate them, they will still suddenly descend, just like the tragedy at Tucker Fortress." The blonde young lady's expression changed when she heard Luo Ye's words. She couldn't help but fall into silence. The tragedy of Tucker Fortress wasn't something that could be avoided with one's will. But even so, Nu Ayer couldn't accept the fact that the young man had once again stepped into a dangerous place. "No, let's forget about that. How can the strength of the Angel King not be a match for you? I just don't want Altacia and the others to recall the memories of that period of time. Besides, I can't bear to fight with you. You too, right?" Hearing that, Miss Angel turned her gaze away in a fit of pique. Her cheeks couldn't help but blush. She also loosened her grip on the chains. The black-haired young man leaned back on the chair again. After gaining the upper hand in the emotional aspect, he started to think about how to persuade her rationally. Carefully recalling the various actions of Collector, the black-haired young man pondered for a moment before speaking. "Why do you say that?" "Identity." According to the young lady's interrogation, the Collector was someone who was able to influence Luo Ye's bloodline and origin form. Although Luo Ye had broken through the shackles, this situation was still too strange. After all, if it was really the ancestors of the Akot family, then there was no need for them to hide. That was because Roy and Vincent weren't criminals. There was no need for them to observe their own family's movements. They would be welcomed back home directly. Then, the only remaining possibility was to trace back to the second era, the Akkad family's main family, the Arde family. The other possibility was that they knew some kind of secret technique and were extremely close to the royal family. Whatever the enemy tried to avoid being exposed, they would need to investigate with all their might. This could be said to be a universal truth in the world. It was even more so when it came to information about one's identity. So, why would the enemy be so careful to hide their identity? No matter which it was, Luoya would need to spend effort to uncover it. Perhaps now was the best opportunity. Indeed, if Grandpa was here, although the mastermind of this incident was Brian, he was also the mastermind behind it. If we don't get rid of him, this incident won't be over. He wanted to use your death to start a chaotic era. I want to avenge you no matter what. A gentle but slightly angry voice echoed in her ears. His unwavering eyes revealed an unforgettable hatred. Looking at Luoya, who valued her so much, the blonde girl widened her eyes slightly. An uncontrollable heat began to flow in her heart, and she couldn't say any words of denial. Don't take any risks. This is an order. Facing the princess's absolute order, the black-haired young man nodded and gave a serious answer. After a moment of silence, the two hugged each other and felt the warmth of each other. After accompanying Nuo for a few hours, the black-haired young man left the palace in a carriage after the crowd dispersed. He returned to the holy capital labyrinth hall that he hadn't seen for a long time. As the Akkad family's residence, everything here was still the same as a few years ago. However, unlike the palace, there were no battle reports or other details of the war here. One of the reasons for this was that the princess forced Luoya to rest for 3 days. Another important reason was the rest of the pagan army and the interrogations of the cultists. In fact, in the last part of the journey, which was after entering the theocracy, a portion of the judges from the Inquisition couldn't travel anymore. They were temporarily arranged to rest in the towns along the way. It was estimated that they would only be able to return after a few days. This showed how rushed the return journey was. Lord Son of God, please allow the Church of Perseverance to protect your safety. This is not only the will of God, but also our personal wish. Furthermore, at this critical moment, we wish to participate in this war as a member of the Akkad territory and fight for our own honor. So that's why. Although the pagan army had the same status as Luoya's personal army in the Akkad territory, due to their identity as cultists, they would more or less be looked down upon. Before the war broke out, it was fine if they escorted Luoya, but after the war broke out, it was inevitable that they would be looked down upon. After knowing everyone's thoughts, Luoya naturally didn't have any objections. However, he still announced the rest plan as usual. The Blitzkrieg War had already reached its limit. The Eric family, who had the strategic depth, had already recovered from the shock. In fact, the battle report had already predicted that the war would only end in early spring. Even if it dragged on until then, in the history of the Shia family, it would definitely be considered a quick war. The pagan army might have joined the war late, but they would definitely fight. Perhaps, they might even encounter some unexpected enemies. The reason why the Eric territory was called a border territory was because it was located in a chaotic land where 3 countries intersected. Other than the theocracy, the other 2 countries were the Kingdom of Knights, Pender, and the Austin Empire. In the past, because of this special terrain, there were constant disputes. The land wasn't fertile, so no one was willing to take it. That was why the Eric family was thrown there. However, according to the latest battle report, the Austin Empire, who had always been indifferent to this area, suddenly mobilized their troops after the war started. Moreover, unlike the Kingdom of Knights, who only guarded the border, the Austin Empire didn't spread their net but began to concentrate their forces. What is that emperor thinking? The black-haired young man muttered to himself and frowned. Whether the dark clouds of war would come or not, everything was still a mystery. Chapter 443. In the study room of the labyrinth in Akkad, a black-haired young man read the letter in his hand carefully. His expression kept changing. Finally, he put down the letter and sighed slightly. That's right, after the outbreak of war, the Akkad mansion was empty again. After receiving the news, Dia immediately secretly went to the Holy Capital to meet with John of the Holy See. The result of their discussion was the outbreak of the Civil War. After that, Dia's performance and actions were basically recorded in the war report. During this period, Ai Lisi requested to go to the Tark Plains several times, but Dia refused with the reason of safety. After the outbreak of war, Ai Lisi also set off with the army. After reading Anna's summary of what happened in the Akkad mansion, although Luoya understood in his heart, he was still quite speechless. After reading the letter several times, Luoya could only sigh helplessly. He silently prayed for the safety of his family far away and sped up his preparations. After deciding to go to the front line, the first thing that Luoya had to solve was the problem of the equipment of the pagan army. After the bloody battle in the Tark Plains, the entire army's equipment was damaged, which had affected the combat strength of the soldiers. Remember, fortunately, although this journey was to help Nu'a Iyer, it was entrusted by John of the Holy See. Therefore, the damage of the soldiers and the damage of the equipment should be paid by the royal family. And it turned out that Her Royal Highness was also very generous. With a wave of her hand, she directly approved it. Not only that, but there were also a lot of rewards. For these loyal pagan soldiers, Nu'a Iyer, as the princess, highly praised them. She also received the 3 pagan leaders, Rodney, Wood, and Cynthia, and personally blessed them. She also called the Church of Perseverance and the Church of Strength friends of the Holy See, and instructed them to protect Luoya in the future. After the ceremony, the pagan army held a carnival in the labyrinth that night. Looking at the excited pagan soldiers, Luoya was filled with emotions for a moment. The soldiers who came and went were no longer afraid of being interrogated. They no longer had to hide their identities in the bar. Now, they had gained the recognition of the owner of the city and even the country. According to the latest battle report, the coalition forces of the Akkad territory and the royal family had arrived at Edgar City. Just as Luoya expected, after the 2 major cities were lost one after another, the Eric family had retreated and holed up in the city. During this period, the coalition forces tried to launch a siege, but it didn't go well. The black-haired young man heaved a sigh of relief. The stalemate seemed to be a good opportunity for Luoya's group to cut in. Due to the strange movements of the Austin Empire, the Saint Mestre Empire didn't dare to act rashly. The situation on the battlefield had come to a standstill. In the palace, the blonde girl looked at the news from the front line and frowned. On the other side of the wide table, there was another report from the distant Tucker Fortress. The Tucker Fortress was strong on the outside but weak on the inside. This was something that the people who enjoyed peace in the Holy Capital didn't understand. In the information that had been released, the Holy See didn't mention the specific damage to the fortress. So, let alone the civilians, even the nobles didn't pay attention to it. Only Nu'a Iyer and the others who had returned from the eastern region could truly understand the uneasiness of the door being left ajar. The eastern region is obviously severely lacking in supplies, but the civil war has taken up more resources. Moreover, it has unexpectedly entered a stalemate. What is the Austin Empire trying to do? Generally speaking, a country's military operations must have a goal, which was the so-called strategic goal. Under normal circumstances, it was nothing more than territory, wealth, and people. Since ancient times, wars centered on these 3 goals had been the main theme of human wars. But looking at the current situation, the actions of the Austin Empire this time were confusing. The Eric family was arranged to guard this place 200 years ago. That era was the era when the conflict between the Saint Mestre Empire and the Austin Empire was the most intense. To a certain extent, the Eric family was actually an abandoned pawn used to delay the enemy when the war broke out between the 2 countries. Because of this, they acquiesced to the expansion of the army and construction. But even so, this land didn't mean much from a military point of view. As for the people, there was no need to mention it. No matter where the Saint Mestre Empire was, anti-Austinism was an old tradition. In the eyes of the Austins, they were all unruly people. In fact, the Austin Empire didn't lack people. It was better to say that almost 100 years after the mutants' invasion, peace had arrived, and the population of all countries was very rich. Chapter 444. Austin Empire, capital of Theo. A moderate amount of snow in winter was seen as a good thing in most areas. The moisture of dry land was beneficial for the growth of crops in the coming year, which was extremely important for agriculture. However, for a city, snow would cause traffic problems, especially during this period of time. In St. Maister, where almost everyone was a Shia believer, today was the new year. Tens of thousands of people would gather to pray. In the country of scholars, today was the birthday of the God of Wisdom. Various schools would gather and hold a conference to showcase themselves. In the Austin Empire, today was the founding day. However, it wasn't the founding day of the Austin Empire. Instead, it was the birthday of the ancient empire in the Second Era. On the founding day, nobles from all over the country would travel thousands of miles to the center of the empire to offer their loyalty and blessings to the ancient race that had held the highest authority of the human race for thousands of years. A grand celebration would be held in the palace. The arrival of guests would even cause congestion in the so-called most prosperous city of the human race. In the splendid palace, a black-haired girl dressed in splendid attire stood alone at the side of the venue. Her amethyst-like eyes reflected the scene of prosperity and peace. Her delicate face was as cold as ever, but even so, she still attracted the gazes of countless young talents. However, it was a pity that this year was the same as previous years. The girl whose eyes and smile tugged at the nerves of everyone was still noble and cold. She was as beautiful as a snowflake, but she would also cause frostbite to those who wanted to get close to her. No one knew what kind of person could catch her eye, just like how no one had ever danced with her before. Lillian was believed to be the child most similar to her father, Emperor Lucas. They seemed to lack any feelings. However, unlike Lucas, Lillian had an inexplicable charm that made people want to melt her even if it meant risking their lives. The Austin Empire, this prosperous empire, was currently caught in a secret war. In front of Emperor Lucas, his 3 children used their strength and influence to attack each other, killing each other in the quagmire known as politics. The winner would get everything, and the loser would be at the mercy of others. After losing the Challenger's Cup, the black-haired girl lost a card that she should have had. On the other hand, Lillian's 2 brothers, Lucas Archman and Aubrey Archman, added another card to their hands. The 2 of them formed a temporary alliance. After the tragedy of the Tucker Fortress in the eastern region, a civil war broke out in the St. Mestre theocracy. This could be said to be the matter that all the countries were paying attention to. However, under this spotlight, a piece of news caught Lillian's attention: the military mobilization of Duke Caesar's territory. When coincidences happened one after another, they might not be coincidences anymore. This was what Lillian had learned over the years. And today, Lillian's premonitions seemed to have come true. Yes, Your Highness Lillian. Please head there as soon as you're done with your matters. After a slight nod, the palace noble who delivered the decree left humbly. Lillian gazed into the depths of the palace, her purple eyes squinting slightly. For Lillian, who understood Her Majesty the Emperor, this wasn't any special treatment. Instead, it was a warning sign. It was impossible for Lucas to want to see her alone because of familial love. There could only be one reason. In the noisy banquet hall, Lillian turned her head and glanced at her 2 brothers in the distance. Then, she turned around and headed into the depths of the palace. In the quiet corridor, Lillian Archman strolled forward. The girl's expression didn't change at all. However, her mind was rapidly thinking about all sorts of possible situations and preparing a strategy to deal with them. On the path leading to the inner court, the guards stood silently on both sides like armored statues. On the majestic door, the ruby in the eyes of the Archman family's double-headed eagle shone brightly. After reporting her arrival, the black-haired girl walked through the open door and saw the only ruler of this huge empire. Any ruler of a powerful country would usually be a powerful extraordinary. Lucas Archman was no exception to this. However, unlike other countries, Lucas didn't show any signs of old age. This black-haired, purple-eyed man's skin was fair and lustrous. His body was well-proportioned, and his face could be said to be delicate. His slender eyes were bright and spirited, and he didn't even have a beard. Chapter 445. Saint Maester Theocracy, Saint Lorraine. It was the same lineup. When they entered the holy white city, tens of thousands of people surged. Countless people came to greet their princess. But when they left, it was silent. The caped warriors were silent. No one knew where they were going. Fortunately, the pagan army was not a force that attracted much attention, and the judges had long been used to keeping a low profile. The whole team seemed to be enjoying themselves. Those who did not know would find it hard to imagine that they were going to a battlefield. However, Luoya understood why. Whether it was the sect of perseverance, which specialized in mercenaries, or the sect of power, which used to live under the siege of the cultists, they seemed to have a natural acceptance of death. The harsh living environment gave them a strong resistance to pressure. As for the judges, they were the most devout Shia believers, but they also had the highest mortality rate among the various positions in the church. No matter how strong they were, any army with such a spirit could be regarded as a great teacher. On the battlefield, experience and skills could be accumulated, but a heart of steel was difficult to learn, not to mention that these were real warriors. Of course, they did not know that the tall woman who threw the small bag to them was a master who could become a general, and the old man who looked at them with a smile was a warrior blessed by the gods. Only the guards on the city wall who sensed the strange atmosphere could tell that there was something different about this team. Remember. In fact, Luoya and Nuair decided to travel safely. The young man did not want too many people to notice their existence. Fame would bring too much attention, and it was inevitable for the generals on the battlefield. Although Luoya was famous for his personal strength, he still could not escape this iron law. Besides, the young man was confident that he was at the top of the blacklist of the Eric family, so there was a high possibility that he would be noticed. Rodney, when you were a leader, how many people have you commanded? Obviously, the number of people that the two of them commanded stopped at the level of a village fight. Although their fights could destroy mountains and rivers, the number of people they commanded was still a small-scale battle. It could not be called a war. As for the judges, there was no need to mention them. It was rare for cultists to band together like Brian did last time. Scum did not trust scum, and it was good enough that they did not stab each other in the back. Therefore, most of them preferred to fight alone. Therefore, most of the judges strengthened their ability to act independently. Although they were much more experienced than ordinary soldiers, they needed a good leader when they acted in a group. Yes, Luoya did not learn about commanding in the famous St. Freya Academy, but in the study of the Akkad mansion. This was the traditional education of the Akkad family. The primary education of the Akkad family was military chess, and it was divided into many different versions according to the difficulty. The first version was like chess in the previous world, and the final version was no different from a military map. Usually, Luoya and Ai Lizi would play a simplified version of military chess before bed, and every time Kadia came home, they would play a big game like an exam. Although Luoya lost every time, he learned a lot from them. At that time, Luoya did not have Paitila, the king of holy beasts, by his side, and the Gulandair consumed too much fuel. Therefore, this battle was a real battle of command, and the results were not bad. However, after that, Luoya did not display his talent in this aspect. The reason was simple, because the security of the Akkad mansion was too good. This behavior of the Akkad family was often interpreted by the outside world as abhorrence of evil. However, as the saying goes, family knows family. Luoya understood the feelings of his ancestors. In fact, they just wanted to play CS. After so many generations of hard work, the bandit leaders from all over the world had an epiphany, and they would rather die than provoke this group of lunatics. Thinking about some of the military strategies of the military experts in the previous world, the teenager could not help but feel excited. However, as the saying goes, if a worker wants to do a good job, he must first sharpen his tools. As a commander, Luoya did not want to go into the battlefield empty-handed, and reality proved that the system did not want either. The bugle horn sounded, the war drum sounded, the first battle tempered in troubled times, nirvana in the flames of war. Chapter 446. As the saying goes, victory and defeat are commonplace in war. Luo Ye, who had fought countless battles in his life, could be said to have a profound understanding of this saying. But he had to admit that there was a difference between victory and defeat. In the tragedy of Tuk Fortress, the loss of over 100,000 regular soldiers was too great. Even the powerful theocracy found it hard to bear. This civil war could be said to be a desperate gamble. If they could successfully suppress the Eric family, the theocracy could use this opportunity to be reborn. But if there were heavy casualties, the turmoil of the country would be unavoidable. Thinking of this, the black-haired youth couldn't be bothered to hide it anymore. He knitted his brows and tore open the report. After quickly skimming through it, Luo Ye's hanging heart finally relaxed a little. To be honest, after reading the contents of the report, Luo Ye felt a little strange. As the saying goes, no one knows a son better than his father. In fact, the reverse was also true. Luo Ye and Ka Dia had fought dozens of battles since they were little chess pieces. So, Luo Ye had some understanding of his father's military strategy. Quickly ending the war, eliminating internal troubles, and gathering strength was the goal of this war. It was also the only way to revive the country. Although the theocracy looked calm now, in fact, countless people were observing the situation. If they couldn't end the war quickly and display enough strength, the nobles in various places would definitely think that the royal family had declined and would have thoughts of raising their own troops. Sir, did something happen at the front line? Perhaps because Luo Ye's expression was too serious, Cynthia and the others couldn't help but come forward to inquire about the details after thinking for a long time. In order to stabilize the morale of the troops, Luo Ye passed the report to Cynthia and the other generals. But Cynthia and the others didn't come up with any useful results regarding the tactics at the front line. According to the report, when the Allied forces launched their second attack, the Austin Empire's military movements became more frequent. The army of the Schroeder family even crossed the border and entered the territory of the Eric family. Later, when they discovered that it was a feint, they retreated. In the beginning, Luo Ye was rather puzzled by the Austin Empire's reaction. After all, the young man believed that ending the civil war and allowing the main forces of the theocracy to advance east was the most urgent matter and the only choice to ensure the safety of the human world. But after looking back at history from another perspective, Luo Ye seemed to vaguely understand the reason behind the Austin Empire's actions. The Austin Empire's actions seemed suspicious, but if one looked at history as a mirror, they would find that the same kind of friction existed in the previous war against the aliens, and their goal was the same: to seize the leadership position in the Holy War against the aliens. There was no doubt that the Holy See played a decisive role in the continuation of the human race. But it had to be mentioned that during this process, the influence of the Holy See and the theocracy would naturally expand, and the number of believers would also increase. In fact, after every alien war, the theocracy would have a golden period of several decades, when its national power and influence would increase significantly. In other words, the only thing that stood in the way of the Austin Empire was the theocracy, and now the theocracy was in an unprecedentedly weak state, so it was the best time to replace it. Once they succeeded, not only would the theocracy become stronger, the Austin Empire, which had the largest territory and population, might even use this as a starting point to establish a united human empire like the ancient Austin Empire from 1,000 years ago. This should be the long-cherished wish of the Ackman's emperors. This time, things are troublesome. Edgar City might be sturdy, but with the help of a level 1 source ranker, it was only a matter of time before it was conquered. According to the original battle plan, Holy See John should have made his move at this time, but now that Duke Caesar's army was interfering in this war with the excuse of having a blood relationship with the Eric family and an alliance treaty, Holy See John could not show up, because this was a trap. Either the Holy See will appear and start a full-scale war, and then reap the benefits from the negotiation table, or stall for time so that Edgar City can't be conquered for a long time, and then the theocracy will completely lose the chance to revive. This is an overt scheme. An overt scheme was different from a scheme that could be broken with a single poke. Even if one figured out everything, it would be futile because an overt scheme was not easy to solve from the start, and because of this, there was no need to hide it. For this kind of mission, even Luo Ye, who had confidence in his father and the army, felt that it was too difficult. But as if it was really blessed by the gods, the theocracy's current situation was not completely unsolvable, because unintentionally, he personally struck a ray of light for this dark future, and that was Brian's death. Chapter 447. The Austin Empire's plan won't succeed. When the brown-haired head maid said that, she revealed a surprised expression. The black-haired girl also stopped what she was doing as if she had accidentally said something wrong. After thinking for a long time, the brown-haired head maid hesitantly reminded Lillian. She clenched the document in her hand slightly and organized her words. Although the so-called Allied army has performed well so far, it's mostly due to Marquis Akkot's good command. Once the battle situation turns unfavorable, this unstable Allied army may very well turn into a mob. Besides, our opponent is Duke Caesar's territory. Duke Caesar's territory. This name had some unique meanings. It indeed had an extraordinary status in the Austin Empire. But after thinking about it again and again, Lillian didn't change her mind. Replace the Saint Mestre Empire as the leader of the humans in Xia and make the Austin Empire the only empire of the humans. This may seem like a glorious goal that everyone will work hard for. But in reality, what's the point? Restoring the glory of the Austin Empire. Although this was a good thing that could benefit the entire country, the benefits were also divided into different levels. The commoners might only have more resources at their disposal and become slightly wealthier. The nobles' situation would be better, their territories would expand, and their status would rise. But in this process, the royal family would benefit from a qualitative change. The Caesar family should have received great benefits from the emperor by dispatching their troops. But even so, the troops were divided into different levels. It would be fine if they won easily, but if they were caught in a bitter battle, the Caesar family wouldn't go all out for the Ackman after weighing the pros and cons. The Caesar family wouldn't go all out if they had to pay a huge price to win. This was Lillian's judgment. But in fact, the Caesar family had another method that was almost certain to win. Thinking about this extremely low-probability event, Lillian frowned slightly. She stood up and walked to the window again. Looking at the snow outside, she suddenly had a bad premonition. While muttering softly, Lillian recalled the appearance of the young man. She couldn't help but pray silently in her heart. In a distant foreign country, the black-haired girl stroked the name on the table as her thoughts ran wild. On the other side, under a candlestick, Luo Ye was looking at the information in her hand and silently thinking about many complicated matters. In short, the Caesar family was not easy to deal with. The ancestors of famous generals would generally have their descendants earn a living in the military. It was a common phenomenon among noble families for sons to inherit their father's legacy. The Caesar family was the same. They were one of the few major families that had grasped military might during their westward migration. They were also one of the founding families of the current Austin Empire. It must be said that Luo Ye was filled with a sense of dissonance when he read the information about the Caesar family. He felt as if he was reading the history of the Akkot family. In fact, there were many similarities between the two families. This made the youth very vigilant. Of course, if that was all, Luo Ye would have been vigilant, but he wouldn't have paid so much attention to it. What made him feel that something was wrong was another piece of information that sounded like a legend. Under the leadership of such a genius, the Caesar family slowly recovered. Latent Caesar's strength also continued to improve. In the end, he reached the highest level of source rank 1, becoming the strongest extraordinaire in the Austin Empire. There were different opinions as to why he did this. Some said it was to leave opportunities for his descendants. After all, if Leighton continued to be a duke, his descendants wouldn't be able to train. When he died, the family might even collapse. Another said that he was tired of the upper echelons of the human race. During that period, the relationship between the Austin Empire and the theocracy was very tense. It even felt like a war was about to break out. In Luo Ya's previous world, people joked that netizens only had 7 seconds of memory. This was the result of the explosion of information. In Shiya's world, where information was underdeveloped, people's memories were relatively long. But even so, it was a fact that Leighton's influence gradually disappeared over the years after he went into seclusion. This situation continued. The Caesar family never held a funeral, but no one cared about Leighton's life or death for a long time. However, what no one expected was that the legends said that he would wake up. After more than 200 years, this white-haired old man had overcome the vicissitudes of time and become the pillar that supported the human race. In front of the warriors who had long forgotten about him, he silently waved his fist and shattered their fear and despair. He crushed the ambitions of the other races and led the people in desperate situations to counterattack and advance triumphantly. He became a hero once again. Even if he was forgotten by the people, even if no one expected him, he still stood up when the human race was facing a crisis. This kind of spirit moved the young man. In fact, Leighton's return did greatly change the situation of the war. He boosted the morale and pulled the human race back from the edge of the cliff. Naturally, no one could object to the old man's decision. But this time, the people didn't forget about him. They wrote books and erected statues for him, worshipping him as a god of war. This was also the reason why Luo Ya could see so much information about him. Unfortunately, this wasn't a good thing for Luo Ya, because the current him was no longer a friend of the Caesar family, but an enemy. Chapter 448. A military meeting. This was the solution Luo Ya chose based on his experience in his previous life when he encountered a difficult problem. He would analyze and discuss the situation and problems he was facing with the others. It was very likely that it would produce a complementary effect. And now, the young man was thinking about the difficult problem. More than 80 years had passed since the last Holy War. The outside world had not received any news about him. Now that several generations had passed, many guesses had emerged. Many people believed that Leighton was still alive and was just living in seclusion like before. However, there were also people who believed that the legendary old man was no longer around because Leighton was injured in the last war against the mutants. Although Antonio, as a high-ranking human, could obtain more resources, the Caesar family was also a great noble. Leighton was still living in seclusion, and with the strength of the king of a level 1 source rank race, it was really hard to imagine that he was dead. And to Luo Ya's opinion, Wood and the others expressed their agreement. After determining that Leighton was still alive, Luo Ya next considered the second question, and that was whether the legendary old man would appear before him. But the young man and his generals could not determine the answer to this question immediately. After hearing Luo Ya's question, Rodney, who had been to the Austin Empire during his travels, was the first to express his opinion. Cynthia, who heard him, also nodded in agreement. The tall woman analyzed the mentality of the strong and gave such a conclusion. Beside her, Wood stroked his white beard and nodded in agreement. But in the face of everyone's unanimous conclusion, Luo Ya did not simply nod his head. Background. No matter how you look at it, the Caesar family's declaration of war this time is an important matter. If Leighton objects, it will not pass at all. And if he doesn't know about it, considering his performance in the last Holy War, I'm afraid the Caesar family won't dare to rashly send out troops because that might cause the strength of humans to be greatly reduced. The black-haired young man sighed, causing Rodney and the others to frown. The pagan leaders looked at each other worriedly. On the other side of the table, unlike Rodney and the others, Luo Ya had a deeper understanding of Origin Class 1. Putting everything else aside, at least for the infamous King of Curses from centuries ago, numbers were meaningless. Not to mention ordinary armies, even the legendary troops of the ancient Austin Empire that Lillian summoned could only be wiped out one by one. In the historical fragment, Luo Ya had indeed killed Prist, but that was under special conditions and schemes. Moreover, Altacia was still able to display her past strength at that time. But in reality, Luo Ye didn't have that advantage, and defeat was almost certain. Facing such a troublesome Caesar family, Luo Ye wasn't the only one who had a headache. Heathcliff, who had placed a lot of chips on the table, was also worried. John of the Holy See, who had once fought alongside Leighton on the battlefield against the mutants, clearly knew Leighton's influence and strength. So before the war between the two sides, he had urgently sent a group of emissaries to Duke Caesar's territory. According to the information from the front line, the emissary group this time was of a high standard. There were many well-known bishops in the group. But Luo Ye was pessimistic about whether they could complete the mission. Unlike the pious theocracy, the Austin Empire had actually inherited the religion of ancient Austin and worshipped polytheism. Luo Ye didn't know about the religious views of the Caesar family, but no matter how he thought about it, it was unlikely for him to communicate with pious and monotheistic bishops. But what the young man didn't know was that while he was worried about the outcome of the negotiation, the complicated situation of the war had changed. Chapter 449. The Vatican's emissary group was a distinguished guest to any nobleman in Xia. Of course, this was in general terms. In fact, the communication between the church and the nobleman was far more complicated than one could imagine. There were also many factors that affected the communication, such as the region. Due to the long years of hostility, although the people here believed in Xia, they did not feel any closeness to the Holy See. In the territory of the Caesar family, the fame and influence of the legendary hero was much greater than that of the Holy See. This was because the emissary group from the Vatican had sent a letter. In the theocracy of Saint Maester, there was only one person who could send a letter with this title, and that was John of the Holy See, who was also at Source Level 1 and was also considered a hero of mankind. Therefore, when he received this letter, even Berkeley could not help but change his expression slightly. He hurriedly took the letter to the depths of the Caesar family's territory. In this valley, the wandering elves could brush away the pain of the people. The time they spent here would also be different from the outside world. Living here for 10 years, the exhaustion of the body would not even be half of that of the outside world. It could be said that this was a disguised form of prolonging one's lifespan. It was also because of this attribute that User Valley had always been listed as the top secret of the Caesar family. Remember, the moment Berkeley dismissed the surrounding guards and stepped into this dangerous place alone, several monstrous ferocious auras immediately appeared in the picturesque valley. The violent elves between heaven and earth also began to become restless. Duke Berkeley's expression was solemn, but he did not dare to act rashly. He raised his head and looked into the depths of the valley, waiting silently. The next moment, a strong pressure suddenly rose from the mountain. Feeling the pressure receding, Berkeley no longer hesitated and strode toward the center of the valley. After walking through the field path, a familiar wooden building appeared at the end of his line of sight. Seeing this, the middle-aged man's expression became more respectful and solemn. He quickly walked into the garden, and on a chair in the garden, a white-haired old man opened his eyes as if he had just woken up from a nap. "Berkeley, why are you here again? What happened?" It was a letter from the Holy See, so he naturally had to pay attention to it. When he heard that the letter was from John of the Holy See, the white-haired old man's expression changed. There were not many familiar names in this era for Leighton, and there were even fewer of them who were his comrades. Writing a letter in his personal capacity represented a personal friendship. Looking at his ancestor who had fallen into silence, Berkeley slowly calmed down. He was basically certain that the letter was in vain, and the reason was simple. It was because the Holy See had misjudged. The military deployment this time was a major event that could affect the era. Berkeley, who still had an ancestor in his family, did not dare to make the decision alone. Leighton, as the hero of the previous war against the mutants, was recognized as the guardian of the collective interests of mankind. As the royal family, although the Acumen's plan could benefit the Austin Empire, it could not avoid the fact that there would be internal friction between the races. Duke Berkeley was very confused about that. The middle-aged man found it hard to understand not only because of Leiden's change of mind, but also because it had been a long time since his ancestor made such a decision. What could make his ancestor, who did not care about worldly affairs, have such a big reaction? Such a question naturally arose in the Duke's mind, and he could not help but pay more attention to it. As he gradually came into contact with Leighton about this matter, Berkeley finally discovered something. Berkeley was very puzzled about this. As one of the 5 major noble families of the Saint Maester theocracy, the Ackett family was naturally a well-known great noble family in Shia. However, the history of the Ackett family seemed to be incomparable to the Caesar family. They were a new noble family in the Third Era, which made them inferior to the Ackett family in the Austin Empire. There was also some big news about the Ackett family recently, and that was that the only son of the Ackett family, Luoya Ackett, won the Challengers Cup, broke the record of being the youngest champion, and obtained the noble title of one of the 5 nations. However, this matter that caused a sensation in the outside world was nothing to Leighton, who had experienced countless major events in his life. "Ancestor, our operation this time is..." Facing the middle-aged man's question, the old man replied after reading the letter. After hearing Leighton's words, Berkeley was finally relieved. The Duke, who was eager to take action, left the secret realm after receiving permission. After the man left, the white-haired old man picked up a document from the table beside him. Chapter 450. Under the moonlit night, Ai Lizi Akat suddenly appeared in front of Kadia and expressed her thoughts on the current situation. However, in the face of the young lady's initiative to volunteer, Kadia hesitated for a moment and immediately rejected her. The black-haired man's attitude was firm. Hearing Kadia's words, Ai Lizi wasn't surprised at all. In fact, the young lady had more or less guessed her father's thoughts. The guilt in his heart made the Marquis rather send his own son to the front lines than let Ai Lizi be in danger. However, this was something that the young lady couldn't accept. According to the information that Ai Lizi had, Luoya had already entered Eric's territory. Ai Lizi could roughly guess what would happen next. The army was different from other organizations. Without Kadia's order, even Ai Lizi wouldn't dare to leave easily. Thinking until here, the young lady took a deep breath and gazed at the middle-aged man before speaking again. "I have to think of a way to get my father to agree, but how?" "Father, there are many monsters at the border between the theocracy and the Austin Empire. With my ability, I can control them to a certain extent. Together with the army of the pagans and the elites of the personal army, it is still possible to temporarily delay the enemy. As long as Big Brother arrives, the situation on the battlefield should be stable. Although I'm not an adult yet, there are many examples of this age in the history of the family, right? Big Brother was only 10 years old when he took over the family. What do I have? Father, after so many years, am I still an outsider in your heart? If Big Brother can take risks, why can't I? If Father still treats me as a member of the family, then please give this mission to me. Let me contribute to the family in this time of crisis." Looking at the silver-haired young lady's reddened eyes, Kadia couldn't help but feel a pain in his heart. If Ai Lizi was his biological daughter, perhaps he would have immediately agreed to her request. But now, although the result of rejecting her was protection, wouldn't the process represent discrimination? "Alright, Ai Lizi, I'll leave that side to you. You don't have to worry about commanding. I'll send someone to hold on until Luoya arrives and you can come back. Yes, it's late. Go have a good night's rest. We'll set off tomorrow." The silver-haired young lady replied as she clenched her fists excitedly. She bowed and slowly disappeared. When she appeared under the moonlight, the tears in her eyes had long disappeared. She couldn't control her smile. 3 more days. Although there weren't many of them, only a few thousand, this movement attracted a lot of attention. Be it friend or foe, everyone knew that this was a force that could change the course of history. Intelligence agents from the theocracy came and went all day long, while Duke Berkeley personally came to Caesar's camp to observe the situation. Chapter 451. Inside the tent at night, the crackling of the bonfire was exceptionally clear in the silence of the night. The footsteps of the patrolling soldiers were accompanied by the crisp sound of clashing armor. The black-haired boy tossed and turned, unable to fall asleep as he stared at the ray of moonlight shining into the tent. He could only get up and walk to the table again. He actually sent AI Lizzie to the front lines. What is father thinking? Everything began with the urgent report sent from the front lines yesterday evening. It was when the sun was setting in the west. When the troops were setting up a temporary camp, the urgent military report was sent by fast horses from the front lines. The contents were about the Caesar family's troops and their response plan, including Luo Ya's orders. If this army were to suffer a crushing defeat, then the situation of the entire theocracy would take a turn for the worse. On the other hand, if they could withstand the pressure, then they could end the war once and for all and prevent the Austin Empire from interfering. In comparison, Edgar City was not even that important. AI Liziakat. Although Luo Ya knew that he would see this name in the battle report sooner or later, it should appear in the intelligence department and the logistics department. It should not be on the battlefield, let alone in the center of the battlefield. After reading the battle report, Luo Ya almost cursed out loud. His rare angry look made the nearby soldiers stop what they were doing. When Cynthia and the others heard that it seemed to be a matter between family members, they all kept quiet out of fear and did not dare to ask. But even so, Luo Ya still could not hide his anger. Luo Ya naturally knew about AI Lizzie's special abilities against monsters. If it were not for the fact that they did not have a capable army, Kadia would not have sent AI Lizzie to the front lines. The boy understood this as well. But there were some things that only Luo Ya knew and was worried about. Sending AI Lizzie to the battlefield at this time was simply cutting out a piece of Luo Ya's heart and frying it in a pot. After reading the battle report, Luo Ya immediately ordered the troops to set out that very night. The troops once again changed their route and headed straight for the border. They traveled for a day and a night. It was only after midnight that the boy ordered for them to rest. Judging by the time, they should be able to reach the front lines by tomorrow night. By then, the soldiers who had traveled for a day would definitely not be in good condition. But if they were to rest, AI Lizzie would have to hold on for one more day. And when Luo Ya thought that the girl might be in danger, he felt unbearable. Could it be that I really have a sister complex? Because of this matter, Luo Ya once suspected that he had some different fetishes. But after thinking about it carefully, he felt that the biggest reason was the problem of trust. Or perhaps, the boy had confidence in Nuair. He knew that the princess was powerful and knew that she would not be defeated so easily. But unlike the others, AI Lizzie had been well protected by him for a long time. She had almost never been in danger before. Another sleepless night passed. The black-haired boy watched as the starry night gradually turned into the morning sun. After a short preparation in the early morning, the troops once again began to move forward. And in the distance, the chaotic situation of the battle was gradually changing as time passed. For Luo Ya, this night filled with worries was an unbearable night. And for the troops of the Caesar family on the border, this night was also an unusual one. But unlike Luo Ya, who was worried about his family, the troops of the Caesar family were worried about themselves. Looking at the hazy silhouette of the huge monster hidden in the night, everyone already knew its identity. And because of that, they felt that it was inconceivable. But now, a completely opposite reality had appeared. The Akate family did not become cowards who fled. Instead, they even roped in this monster that should have been impossible to rope in and attacked them. Duke Berkeley did not know the answer to this question. But there was one thing that he was certain of: the situation was far more troublesome than he imagined. The King of Disaster was the ruler of the forest. That was why the monsters that attacked this time did not belong to any specific species. There were single-horned wolves, three-headed snake monsters, griffins, and eagle-footed bats that covered the sky. All sorts of monsters were summoned to the battlefield by the King of Disaster. And the humans quickly responded to the situation. In the forest outside the battlefield, a silver-haired girl stood under the moonlight. The spell power around her burned quietly. Her eyes followed the light pouring down from the sky as she observed the chaotic battle in the distance. But to the girl's surprise, things did not seem to be going as smoothly as she imagined. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.